G'day mate, 40 here. Took a few days off under the weather, watched all of Tulsa King, starring Sylvester Stallone, watched the oeuvre of Taylor Sheridan. Now I'm back in black. Here we go. I really enjoyed this message from the Allstate chairman, letting us know how we should be reacting to the terror attack in New Orleans. Just what I wanted to hear. I don't know about you. I always enjoy getting lectured by insurance companies.
Welcome to the Allstate Sugar Bowl. Wednesday, tragedy struck the New Orleans community. Our prayers are with the victims and their families. We also need to be stronger together by overcoming an addiction to divisiveness and negativity. Join Allstate working in local communities.
Shut up! Who's he talking about? Addiction to divisiveness and negativity. Who exactly has an addiction to divisiveness and negativity? And who exactly should not be negative with regard to terror attacks, such as what happened in New Orleans? Like, what the heck, man? We don't need this. Saying that we shouldn't be feeling negative about the terror attack, and that we shouldn't try to create a dividing line between decent society and indecent society, such as those who support terror attacks like this. Like, what the heck? Who wants to be lectured by some dude, my God, he's the chairman of Allstate? I don't know. Like, you're watching a bloody Sugar Bowl game, you're under the weather, and you probably don't feel like getting lectured by this guy about negativity and divisiveness after a terror attack. All right, much of life boils down to us versus them. And that's entirely appropriate. Us versus them. Yeah, that's divisive. If I meet the right woman and I want to marry her, I want a division. All right, I'm the only one who gets to have intimate relations with my wife. I don't want anyone else having relations with her. If someone attacks my country, yeah, I feel negatively about that. Right? I feel negatively about people committing violent crime, and now you're telling me that this is bad. Addicted to negativity and divisiveness, right? There's a time and a place for negativity and divisiveness. Like, who needs this lecture from an Allstate chairman? It used to be that insurance companies paid out over 80 cents the dollar of premiums, but through delay, deny, defend, they've cut that back down under 60 cents. If you've been trying to get a payout from your insurance company, you know how much more difficult it's been since the 1990s when McKinsey came to town, a book about the McKinsey consulting company, and they told, hey, you insurance companies, you can make a lot more money if you just practice delay, deny, defend. Great. And now we get a lecture from the delay, deny, defend crowd who makes it so difficult to get an honest payout from an insurance company. I don't need it.
Reports are with what Trump's going to do and what the team has put together. I think you will agree that Trump's more disciplined, or his organization is more disciplined than it was. They obviously have a short window because it's not 4 years, it's 2 years. And it appears as though it's going to be a shock and awe kind of deal of him coming out off the 20th. The press hasn't really reconciled that with how they covered the White House in the past 3 or 4 years. At the same time, they've never named names of the guys who were in the quote-unquote advisors to Biden, which no one ever holds them accountable for some of the decisions that were made. How are you guys going to catch up or be able to get on the train? Because I think he's going to blow right past you. I think Trump is going to stay in this mode of not being in front of the camera, and he's just going to blow the first 2 years go by. And when people start seeing the results, I think they're going to adapt. Now, how are you going to catch up, or how are you going to reconcile how we didn't cover this, how we didn't cover that? Okay. How do you not?
Brilliant questions. Now, I will say before I turn it over to Mark, Mark is one of the reporters who is I exempt from my normal critique of failure. Mark is a clear-eyed, honest, fair reporter, which is why he's got such great sources across the board. So he can speak for himself in a minute, but Mark is not going to. They're not going to blow by Mark. They may blow his nose. I have said before,
All right, this is Mark Caputo. He's a reporter for Axios now, and he landed that huge Susie Wiles interview, which just dropped today.
I don't understand how these news organizations can have the same people, the same editors, the same anchors, the same correspondents covering the Trump administration, who just spent 4 years colluding with the Biden administration without coming clean. I just don't understand it. So that's part of the problem. But I think you put your finger on a thing that my friend Joe says, if you're moving 800 miles an hour, it's very hard for anybody to keep up with you. And I think you're right that it's going to be difficult, particularly because the Democratic donors are dispirited. And I already talked earlier in the program about the lack of big figures who can try to keep rhetorically up with Trump, and there'll always be a 7-ring circus going on. So even if the press tries its hardest to covering all 7 rings, is going to be tough. So the ideology is a problem, the bandwidth is a problem, and the fact that Trump has an army now, inside and outside. All those podcasters and all those people on social media, they're not going away. They're part of this whole operation, and there are no analogs on the left.
As well as the power of MAGA.
As well as the power of MAGA. So, Mark, what are your thoughts on this extremely important issue, or set of issues, really?
Yeah, a few times during the break, I've grown fond of Negronis and finally just went out and bought the gin and the Campari. And I wound up drinking too much over the break. And I kept starting to tweet how angry I was at how we and the mainstream media fucked up covering Biden. But then I would stop myself. But I can say as a in a related topic, what Mark had said, when I was at Politico and when I was at NBC, 2021, the covered Biden in 2020 for Politico, and in 2021 left for NBC in 2022. I lost my job there afterward. Was watching the mainstream media react along with the rest of the body politic like an immune system to a foreign agent in Trump, and to throw every macrophage and immune system response at him really just sort of damaged us, I think. I don't really have a lot of problem with the coverage of Trump. I have a lot of problem with the way in which Biden was covered. The problems I do have with the way Trump has been covered in the mainstream media is that our social class is generally higher educated. It is now increasingly concentrated, the national political news media, in DC and New York. They disproportionately draw from Ivy League schools. Nothing against Harvard, Mark.
No offense. No offense. David. If I could erase it from my resume, I would.
No, I would have gone to Harvard. I still would.
And I'm a GW grad, so.
What's really brought home as local, state, and regional newspapers have collapsed and national political coverage has been concentrated in 2 cities, New York and DC, the issue of culture has really come to the fore, and the way the mainstream media has covered politics has been increasingly from a more a liberal mindset or view, which became more progressive. I noticed in 2015, when I was hired on a Politico from the Miami Herald, where I worked, I was like, I wound up working with young reporters who had gone to Columbia who knew more about the theory of intersectionality than about how to write a lead, how to write a headline, how to report out a story, like it's kind of the nuts and bolts stuff. Now, I started out in newspapers, and man, I made every mistake along the way. But it's just different. I'm also a second-generation reporter as well, so I to a degree, I learned some of the craft from osmosis from my dad. But that has just been a huge problem. And so to the degree to which we have covered Trump wrong, I think it has been sort of an aggregate in always being always taking sort of the Democratic side, or a little too often, of like, oh my God, he's going to end democracy, he's a threat to the system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's just been this kind of hyperventilation and this constant sky is falling paradigm with the mainstream media coverage of Trump, which a lot of people have just started to ignore. David Shore, a Democratic analyst, a poll guy, data whiz, recently posted on Twitter something interesting about how the number one group that Democrats increased their vote share with were the people who pay attention to the mainstream media. But fewer people are paying attention to the mainstream media. And Trump got a higher proportion of this bigger growing share of the electorate, while Harris got a bigger proportion of a shrinking share of the electorate when you think of it kind of epistemologically. So that problem has just kind of come to the fore. Will Trump continue to blow by, to use your phrase, the mainstream media? Yes. And it's incumbent on us to kind of retrench and to apply sort of an old school standard of, fair, accurate balance. That doesn't mean just because you say balance that, we've got to, put it.
Okay, that was an excellent summary of the problem, which just became so absurd in the final weeks of the 2024 presidential campaign. So this is interesting study. Democrats' understanding of Republicans gets worse with each additional degree that they earn. So Democrats without high school diplomas do so much better than PhDs at understanding Republicans. So you'd think education would make you better informed about the world, and sometimes it does. So we'd expect that the more educated you become, the more you can understand what other Americans think. In fact, the more educated a person is, the worse their perception gap, with one critical exception. This trend only holds true for Democrats, not Republicans. So while Republicans' misperceptions of Democrats do not improve with higher levels of education, Democrats' understanding of Republicans gets worse with every additional degree they earn. Right? The effect is so strong that Democrats without a high school diploma are 3 times more accurate than those with a postgraduate degree. And here are some other things that I tweeted while I was down ill the past few days. Pascal tweets, one thing I'm learning after spending long stretches of time with middle class and above Brits is how constantly seething with anti-Americanism they are. Right, this guy is French. He says, I thought the French were anti-American. We have nothing on the Brits. It's just a total different league. Right? The French mostly don't care about America. If you bring America up, we'll say anti-American stuff, but mostly we are self-centered, which is the natural, normal, and healthy thing to be, is to be primarily concerned with your own people. But Brits will bring up anti-American stuff in conversation for absolutely no reason. And so too with the upper class, the educated class in Australia. Right? You'll talk about the weather and they'll be, well, at least it's not as bad as Donald Trump. Right? The most educated Brits will say the dumbest things about Americans. It's all about, it's all guns and no health care in America. One Brit explained to me the reason that Americans don't have roundabouts is because they're too dumb to build them. Yeah, there is constant seething among the most educated Brits and Australians I've noticed about Americans, not just about Trump. Another thing I've noticed is how these guys who blew themselves up in Las Vegas and who committed terror in New Orleans, what total losers they are. So being a marginalized loser is about the biggest threat that you can be to society, right? So these latest perpetrators appear to be less driven by ideology and politics than by rage over personal failings, right? If you are furious about your personal failings, you're going to be a danger to society, right? These are bitter, angry people. That's Bruce Rydell, counterterrorism expert, 30-year veteran of the CIA. Here's a classic case of someone who converted to Islam, had 2 failed marriages, serious financial problems. He finds now a course to justify his life in his rage. So I notice marginalized losers in America go out and commit violence when they stumble upon an ideology such as conversion to Islam or white nationalism. But it begins with losers, marginalized losers. So Jabbar, who carried out the attack in New Orleans, he contemplated killing his family before carrying out the ISIS-inspired terror attack in New Orleans. Good article in the New York Times about H-1B visas. For more than a decade, Americans working in the tech industry have been systematically laid off and replaced by cheaper H-1B visa holders. Prominent companies have been firing their locally hired IT departments and outsourcing those jobs. When Americans realize they can't make a living as software engineers, they leave the industry. So the H-1B program worsens the very shortages it's supposed to address. Most H-1B visa holders are lower paid labor. They're not top talent. In May, Elon Musk laid off more than 14,000 Tesla workers, including many H-1B visa holders. Reddit threads filled with laments by workers who had moved to the United States from India only to be let go with no warning. They were desperate to remain in the country, but because they were here on an H-1B visa, they're essentially owned by their employer, and they have few options. So this is why these foreign workers are compliant and cheap, because they can't leave the companies that control the visas. So if they were really top talent, they would be getting green cards, not enduring 6 years of underpaid, indentured servitude. So how do they get away with mass layoffs then claim shortages? That's one professor who's written about the topic for 2 decades. Confronted on X with evidence of low pay for H-1B positions, Elon Musk admitted what many of us already knew. The program is broken and needs major reform. Yeah, the more you learn about these people who carry out terrorism in the United States, right, whether they're of the white nationalist variety or the convert to Islam variety, they're just such total losers, right? They don't have jobs that they can be proud of. They have mental health and social crises. They are alienated. They are marginalized. Nobody wants to hang out with them, right? They get isolated. They obsess about their own death. They have no close friendships, right? They're not connected with their family. They don't have money. They don't have prospects. And so they immerse themselves in some exciting part of the online world to get themselves some meaning. So we've got rising cases of self-radicalization who are teenagers who are avid consumers of Islamic State videos or the more extreme white nationalist material. And they see themselves as stepping into some kind of heroic role. So this one bloke who was planning to disrupt the Taylor Swift concert in Austria took multiple selfies with his phone camera, posing with knives and a machete that he purchased online. Later told police that he took the photos because he wanted to be cool and brag about it. I was just watching a friend live streaming about hot button issues on last Saturday night, and he's like playing with sharp knives while he's doing it. Don't think that's a good idea. Right, if you're already on the margins, perhaps don't play around with sharp knives.
Put in a bogus talking point from the other side simply because the other side said it. But those principles still apply, and I think we became unmoored from that during the first 8 Trump years, and hopefully this will be a bit of a reset for the way in which we approach it going forward.
So, and which gets to another point where the mainstream media, the upper level, the New York, Washington, D.C. gamut, why is there, and I'll give this example, Marsha McCallum from Fox News had, I think, Mayorkas on, or had someone from the Biden administration on during the break. She got 2 questions in on the guy, had him on the ropes, but she wouldn't use, and this is apparently consistent with others, and that is there was no nailing. They wouldn't use the 3rd bullet and shoot them down.
Yeah.
In the question.
So in Australia and England, they're often more aggressive, and so there's one classic British TV newsreader who asked the same question to a politician 13 times because the guy wouldn't answer.
And I don't know why that is.
Yeah.
And I think you know the interview I'm talking about.
I didn't see it.
So Donald, I'll tell you, someone who's conducted live interviews with people who are evasive, you face a choice, right? How many times are you willing to ask it if they're not going to answer?
Right.
And you've got limited time. My policy is if the question's worth asking, it's worth staying with until you get an answer. But you have to do it in a way that makes good television. And that means you have to say, Mr. Secretary, I'm stopping right here and I'm acknowledging. I've asked you twice a very direct question. You've declined to answer it both times. I don't want to spend the whole interview talking about this, but I think it's a really important question or I wouldn't have asked it. So I'm going to ask you one more time in as clear a way as I can. And you can either answer it or you can say you're declining to answer it. But I want the viewers to know one or the other. Either you're going to give us a direct answer or you're declining. That's what I do. But that's my style. I think I share your frustration. When they ask it twice and then they move on, they just wasted the time. And they haven't put in sharp relief the failure to answer. But that is more common than I wish it were. So you cited one example, but I could cite 100. The other thing is they got to stop asking yes/no questions. They have to stop asking questions the guests are expecting. I don't know how many times I have to say these things until people will listen to me.
You were looking for suggestions before the.
Okay, his comment from California.
My question would have been perfect for your last 2A Tonight of the year of last year. It's related to blue cities. I'm a Trump supporter, and even though we had a couple propositions that panned our way with regards to crime, there's still a lot of problems in big city, blue states. And I wanted to see if there's if you know of any appetite with the Republicans in DC to do anything about that. Because for us here in a state, 4 in 10 Californians voted for Trump, believe it or not. Yep. And it feels like it's impossible to do something here with respect to education, crime, and homelessness. Those 3, homelessness and housing. So those topics were big topics. I know conservatives typically like to leave things to the state, but these are problems that are not going away. And at least from my perspective, the only route seems to be a federal type of solution. And on a similar note, if there's any kind of, Trump loves pomp and circumstance, and we have an Olympics coming up in LA in 4 years where he's going to be the president. Is there anything to get that on the radar for him?
As for the Olympics, yes, Trump will care a lot about the Olympics. Mark, what are your thoughts?
This is not going to answer your question, but it's one of those things that interests me. is when I see coverage in other places, and I go to places like New York and DC, and from what I understand, you see it in LA as well. Every item in the CVS is behind glass now, or behind plastic, because there's just so much shoplifting. We don't really have that in Florida. And I don't think we necessarily have that in Florida because everyone's armed, or because the cops are there, or because we have more Republican politicians. Just brings home to me just the idea of culture. And there's just something pernicious that can take place in a society where suddenly everyone decides, like, you know what, we're just going to shoplift. Or, you know what, we're going to light someone on fire on the subway. And I just don't know ultimately how much a politician or a political party can solve that problem, or perhaps even be to blame for it. I don't get me wrong. I don't think.
Hey, if you don't punish people for doing bad things, then you incentivize the worst parts of human nature. I love roundabouts, but it only takes one dope to derail their simple elegance and efficiency. I noticed roundabouts are incredibly popular in Australia and the United Kingdom, not so much in the U.S. I don't know how much do we lose not having roundabouts. Did you see the Netflix series Painkiller? It's about the Sackler family and how they marketed OxyContin, better known just as Oxy, and even selling it at 160 milligram levels, where it became known as OxyCoffin, and just made a ton of money. And then we had such a rapid increase in death. So it's a combination of individuals who are prone to addiction because they're so screwed up and their life isn't working, and then a company that knows how to play the system. And so they encountered the one FDA commissioner who was in charge of approving their drug, who actually took his job seriously, and then they had to run some sort of program on him. Essentially, they hired him a year after he approved their drug for a lot of money. So they knew how to work the inside game, but they overreached, and it was incredibly frustrating to see the government just settling initially with Sackler with very minimal criminal penalties. And I'm a little bit torn on this, because I remember in the 70s and 80s and 90s, there was a lot of discussion. I heard Dennis Prager in the 80s and 90s talking about people with chronic pain and not being able to get medication that would help. So you'd want people who are dying, right? You'd want people with cancer to have access to effective painkillers like Oxy, but you don't want to be giving it out freely to other people because it's so dangerous. So just like with marijuana, didn't that start out in California as just for medicinal purposes? So if people are dying, then I see the argument for it. But then there's that slippery slope that we saw with marijuana. Now you walk around LA, you walk around cities in California, and just so many streets in the cities of California stink from pot. So is it possible just to have reasonable, responsible use of Oxy targeted at just a tiny percentage of the people who take Oxy now, instead of just being given out randomly for some kind of ill-defined backache? But it's a complicated issue, right? You want people who have severe pain to access pain relief. On the other hand, there are just so many people prone to addiction that they are going to abuse the drug, and you want to regulate and keep dangerous drugs away from people, particularly prone to addicting. So that's why I'm not purely libertarian. I want society to be something of a buffer against the worst tendencies in human nature. I'm fine with some limits on pornography, for example. Perhaps you have to register with your ISP. Otherwise, you don't get any access to pornography. I am for keeping prostitution illegal in most places in the United States, because otherwise, for most people, what is legal they equate with what is moral. I am for seatbelt laws and wearing helmets. I want to encourage kids to graduate from high school. So I am for a little bit of a nanny state. I guess I'm open to banning the advertising of sugary foods, aiming that advertising at children. So you could say I'm for the nanny state. I'm open to some application of a nanny state. I don't think that big food companies should be able to target food that's really terrible for you at kids, but maybe they shouldn't be able to target it at adults either. So maybe certain basic foods that are just loaded in sugar, we should not allow to be advertised, certainly not on TV. I would support a ban on advertising for alcohol on TV and a ban on advertising for gambling on TV. I'm okay if you can go to Las Vegas and gamble, but people shouldn't just be able to pick up their phones and place bets, because it's just way too exciting. And too many young men in particular who are already prone to risk-taking are going to get in trouble. So I would rather have a ban on alcohol and gambling on TV than a ban on cigarettes. But I'm fine with the ban on cigarettes as well. So I'm fine with, I don't know, 1/3 of the nanny state. So ban the advertising of the most dangerous foods, and ban advertising for alcohol, ban advertising for gambling. I think I'd be down with that. So some degree of nanny state, but I prefer a father model for government rather than a mother nurturing model. So even fathers recognize that there need to be some limits. Say you want society assisting the traditional family and providing incentives for people to stay away from drugs, stay away from gambling, stay away from alcohol, stay away from the easiest and most thrilling forms of self-destruction and addiction, such as oxy. So I'm fine with more of a nanny state than we have right now. So in Australia, that's too much of a nanny state for my tastes. But how about some combination somewhere in between the freedom level of the United States and the fairness obsession with Australia? I guess I'm down with a little bit more nanny state in the United States. Listening to the heartfelt comments of Elliot Blatt, it made me think, yeah, maybe we need to discourage advertising for the most damaging foods. All right, so while I was sick, I noticed that the news is dominated by how great Jimmy Carter was, contrary to popular belief, and how great Joe Biden's term was. And both Carter and Biden strike me as failed presidents, and Joe Biden in particular, he has had a foreign policy legacy that is the worst of any president in the past 100 years. I mean, just absolute unnecessary own goal with our unnecessary involvement in Ukraine. And I don't think Biden should have flown to Israel and thrown in with Israel. I don't really want the president of the United States talking Israel and the Palestinians all the time. I don't want that taking up his time. Israel is perfectly capable of defending itself, right? It's an American ally, so I'm open that there's a very good case to be made that we need Israel as an ally, but I'm not for subsidizing Israel, and I just don't want Israel and the Arabs and the Palestinians taking up the American president's time, because it has absolutely nothing to do with the well-being of Americans. Right? If, God forbid, right, I experienced deep pain on October 7th, 2023, when Gaza invaded Israel and was responsible for the deaths of about 1,200 Israelis, but that didn't do anything to the well-being of 98% of Americans. Their lives weren't substantially affected. Now, Israel's gone into Gaza, and if Israel has killed 40,000 Gazans, that does nothing to the quality of life of Americans. So I want the American president being America first, focusing on the welfare, the well-being of Americans. And every minute that he spends talking about Israel, talking about the Palestinians, talking about the Arabs and that mess in the Middle East, I just think it's a distraction from what he should be concentrating on, and that's the welfare of American citizens. So Colin Liddell has decoded Richard Hanania. So Hanania is interesting. He's educated, law degree, and a PhD in political science. He accepts that different groups have different gifts. But then most of his output is just so repellent. It's so obviously scheming for attention. It's so obviously lame. It's so obviously, I'm so smart, I see things that the rest of you don't. So the ratio of nonsense to value is just way too much nonsense for way too little value with Richard Hanania. At the same time, I'll give him credit for interviewing Jared Taylor and having Amy Wax repeatedly on his show. So he's a smart guy. And it's a shame that I just don't find much value in general. So he's a self-parodying bore, writes Colin Liddell, for the predictable way he takes the side of Israel and why he automatically supports neoliberal measures like mass immigration, of which he is a relentless cheerleader. He seems to align with the woke right that criticizes the distant right by ascribing to it the bad characteristics of the woke left. This woke right doesn't really make much sense to me, but Richard Hanania doesn't make much sense to me, except as someone like Nick Fuentes and Richard Spencer is primarily about himself. And Jeffrey Goldberg, right? I don't think that Jeffrey Goldberg puts anything above his own career. So Goldberg was one of those journalists who helped to lie us into the disastrous 2003 Iraq invasion. Never published anyone with a positive perspective on Donald Trump. So he's in charge of The Atlantic. He's got generous funding from Steve Jobs' widow. And he just doesn't seem to stand for anything greater than himself. And this is his PR photo that he puts out. So he tried to lie us into a war with Iran. He's always got some pointless forever war that he's promoting. He's been promoting deeper and deeper American involvement in the Ukraine war with Russia. You'd think he'd just be so ashamed by his track record that he'd go away. But no such luck. And because he's got a lot of funding, right, he's able to hire more and more writers. And this is what he tells the New York Times. We believe in accountability journalism. We want to cover the incoming administration rigorously. I want to build our team with the best political reporters and editors I can find. And the best political reporters and editors that Jeffrey Goldberg could find never thought it fit to report on Joe Biden's obvious senility since 2017. Only when Biden had that disastrous debate with Donald Trump, June 28 of last year, did The Atlantic finally start covering in a serious way Joe Biden's obvious senility. And so, really, after your incredibly one-sided coverage of Donald Trump for the past 10 years, and Goldberg's the bloke who runs all these thinly sourced stories alleging that Donald Trump has contempt for members of the American military. So Jeffrey Goldberg has never had much of a problem running with a thin one-source story if it is compelling enough, if it grabs the attention, right? Because he doesn't seem to stand for anything higher than Jeffrey Goldberg, right? Is there anything that he believes in greater than himself? Is there anything that Richard Hanania believes in greater than himself? I don't sense that. So, here is Colin Liddell's analysis of Richard Hanania. So he tries to present his arguments as well-argued logic, but his supposedly objective views of a strong core of subjectivism and irrationalism stemming from his own identity as a Christian Palestinian. For example, he summed up his recent debate with Jared Taylor as, I think that while he's right that people have tribal instincts, revealed preferences show that they don't care as much about race as he thinks. Right? That may be true for Richard Hanania, but why is it? All right, people respond to incentives and the way that people conduct their lives, where they choose to work and live and who they socialize with and who they worship, shows that people have a very strong preference for people like themselves. So, according to Colin Liddell, because of Hanania's ethnic identity, he comes from a group that is too small to make racial solidarity a meaningful strategy. Too small in the United States, so there are only approximately 160,000 Palestinian Americans. So with these low numbers, ideas of tribalism and ethnic solidarity are meaningless. So why did Richard Hanania go for a big move from being alt-right to now fairly conventional liberal in many areas? Probably an offset to protect his radical individualism, which allows him to surreptitiously trick himself into feeling subconsciously American in a general sense. Trying to identify as white caused all manner of problems for someone as logical, intelligent, and quasi-white as Richard Hanania. His support of Israel weakens attacks on him from Jewish Antifa organizations such as the Southern Poverty Law Center. So the SPLC refers to Hanania as a right-wing academic, and that's about it. So it's hard to imagine Southern Poverty Law Center softballing a doxed former alt-righter in this gentle way. So is Richard Hanania simply a broken sword? No, I think he's someone who doesn't stand for anything more valuable than himself and his own attention-seeking and career. And Colin Liddell concludes, it's a more respectable form of wrestling with one's own personal demons than throwing helpless poodles off roofs like another deracinated, atomized individual from the Hanania clan did. Okay, Donald Trump coming in, Joe Biden going out.
To explain away what happened to Joe Biden and the Biden administration later in the show, but it is weird to point out that there was a PR campaign going on, a kind of retrospective of the past 4 years being conducted by the mainstream media that is comically favorable to a clearly disastrously failed administration, by which I mean we could talk about the policy reasons that there were failures, and maybe we would disagree with Democrats and liberals about those, but Biden and Harris lost a re-election effort, and therefore you have to treat the presidency as everybody treats one-term presidencies as a failure, and you wouldn't really know it was a failure based on a lot of this coverage, all of which comes back to the point that we are living through a hilarious delegitimization crisis in the mainstream media. There is literally... Oh, go ahead, Abe.
There's one exception, but it relates to something we're going to discuss later in the show, so I don't want to jump too far ahead. But universally now, I think pretty much all press cover the Afghanistan withdrawal as a disaster. And that wasn't the case at the time at all.
Okay, so...
The Afghanistan withdrawal was messy, but often it's more important to do the right thing, even with the mess. So getting out of Afghanistan was definitely the right thing to do.
The point I was sort of going to make is that there is one major American journalistic institution that is in a condition of decent health, and that is the New York Times. And literally every other major journalistic institution of my lifetime, of the more than 6 decades of my lifetime, is in a state of crisis. And all they do, day in and day out, is deepen the crisis that they are in with descriptions of America, the politics of the United States, the condition of the United States, the condition of the world, the condition of Israel, the condition of crime, the condition of inflation. They are describing it in ways that ordinary, rational people, literate people who read and want to pay attention to the news know is not true. And that's why I'm struck by this period, because I myself wrote a book in 1993 about the first Bush administration and its decline and fall. And I don't think that my conceit that the Bush administration that had essentially committed suicide was even remotely controversial, or that anybody would say that the Trump defeat in 2020 wasn't the result of Trump's own failures leading to his loss, or Jimmy Carter now being valid, now being
that's a key point, John, because this process you're describing also apparently works retrospectively. You mentioned the New York Times, or as I call it, the Jimmy Carter funeral report, because every single day I get about 5 articles explaining to me why Jimmy Carter was not as bad as you may have thought. And you also get the tracking of the Carter state funeral. And I have to say, there is a contrast, and I think it illustrates what you're talking about, because for those of us who were around when Ronald Reagan died in 2004, 20 years ago, when Reagan's casket was moved from place to place, there were large crowds gathered to follow it. That's not the case with Jimmy Carter. He was moved in Georgia. His remains were moved in Georgia over the weekend, and the Post and the Times treated this as a state funeral, which it is, but didn't really get the populace out there. And it's a rebuke, I think, to the messaging that we're seeing from the media, the same messaging that's saying, oh, Biden, what are you talking about? This was a great administration. Interestingly enough, it's the same writer, Peter Baker of the New York Times, who is both attempting to revise Carter's reputation and writing in the New York Times yesterday that, Biden has left this country in a fantastic place, even if Americans are so inconsiderate not to recognize it.
Can we also say just a brief word about Speaker Johnson? Because I feel like he is a very old school character in a new political universe. And there are a lot of people who are having trouble grappling with how he goes about doing what he's doing. He's very quiet. He's like the night manager character, right? He's Jonathan Pine or whatever his name was. He's just quietly doing what he needs to do. But he's doing it fairly capably considering what he's the caucus he has to wrangle. And it's striking to me that the media, which has been also spending a lot of time giving praise and attention to former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, has not really gotten their heads around who he is and what he does. He's still sort of mysterious for someone with such an important public role, third in line to the presidency. And I feel like that is part of what you all are discussing. It's this inability to understand the new political universe and to understand the actors in it apart from first-term Trumpism. And they're going to really struggle, I think, in the coming Congress to this huge big bill that the Republicans want to pack everything into and pass. If that succeeds, there will be a lot of political reporters who will be flummoxed as to how that gets pulled off if it does.
I just want to say, I think that's a great point, because it goes to the biggest problem with the media doing what they're doing, which is that they miss the story. So they're missing the story on Johnson, and they missed the story from the start on Johnson. Remember when he first appeared as possible speaker, the stories were that he's some sort of crazy extremist. And from the initial framing, they were never able to give us the news.
Well, Johnson's not, I don't think Johnson is mysterious. I think that Johnson is a polite, reserved, temperamentally very level, even. Maybe this is a weakness on his part because he doesn't scare
people. It's just an
people.
anomaly in our current political environment.
Well, okay, so John Thune, who will now be the Senate majority leader, not very different. The people who want to imitate Trump are all the Republican backbench, right? I mean, if you think about it, maybe with the exception of Jim Jordan.
Well, there's one other character in this drama, which I think also changes the rules of the game. And it was Mickey Kaus who pointed out on Twitter the other day, we thought someone was going to be over the top and crazy and making pronouncements and interfering with everything, but we didn't realize it would be Elon Musk, right?
Fair enough.
That was a very good point.
Musk
has become Trump 1, whereas right. Trump 2 is Trump's version of a statesman so far and kind of in the back and doing the right thing.
But if you think about it, so the Republicans that are famous for being divisive or, tough, or Massey now sort of going for that role, but Nancy Mace and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and all, and, Matt Gaetz now gone, they are not representative of the general political direction or comportment of the Republican Party in Washington. They're imitative, but as Matt has been pointing out during the entire fight over Johnson's vote, the vast majority of the Republicans in the House would have been perfectly happy to just sail him through. That's why he only lost one vote out of 219. And certainly that's true of the Senate, where people can be very provocative or can be very pointed, but their demeanor is not revolutionary or bomb throwing or something like that. The world has now left that in the hands of not only Trump too, the unelected richest man in the world, but in the hands of Trump. And it's kind of maybe after all this time freed them up to kind of put their heads down and do their jobs, which is where this grand bill, or whether there's going to be one big bill or two big bills that they pass.
Well, it's going to be, they want to do one. That was the headline out of it. And I love the name, Mega MAGA. We've had MAGA, Ultra MAGA, and now Mega MAGA.
The Transformers movie.
Yeah, I don't know what Omni MAGA comes next, I guess. But Mega MAGA apparently will be one bill passed through reconciliation. that covers everything from the border to energy to, of course, the big enchilada, which is the tax code and the renewal of the TCJA, the Trump tax cuts of 2017. There was a fight, as you say, John, not a fight, but a disagreement over whether this should be broken up into two bills, which would allow the administration to score some early victories if they did just one reconciliation bill covering energy and the border and maybe some deregulatory things, and then left the tax code piece, which is going to be very complicated, to another bill for the fall. Trump decided this weekend that instead there will be an attempt at one bill. And I think the reason that they're attempting one bill is because with a narrow margin like you have in the House, you want to kind of stack up all of the musts in one bill so that dissenters really don't have much wiggle room. If they end up not being satisfied, say, with the increase in the mortgage interest deduction, as some of the suburban blue state Republicans are really arguing for, well, Speaker Johnson can now say to them, look, I did what I could, but are you really going to vote against this bill when it includes border wall funding, when it includes opening up new lands to energy drilling, when it includes getting rid of a lot of the wokery that's been put in place? And I think from a strategic standpoint, when the real question is what can pass the House, this does make a little bit of sense.
I think also politically and over the long term, it does something that is salubrious for the American political system, which is that the Republican agenda, should this work, will be the policy of the United States from the get-go in the Trump administration. And so the 2026 midterm elections and the 2028 elections, in which we will see who succeeds Trump and who rivals Trump, will largely be run on the record that will have been established in the very early days of Trump's term here. And they'll stand or fall based on the policies on the border, on taxation, on deregulation, on the things that are in the mega MAGA bill. And we've been confused about that and how to judge the politics in the United States, precisely because it's been so hard for policy to get made. We've seen how, in the case of the Biden administration, its steps both in 2021, as Abe mentioned Afghanistan, which was August of 2021, and then some of the legislation that was not only in 2021 but 2022, was what told on them when they had to go before the American people in November. That's a good thing. It is a good thing it's not maybe not be a good thing for the country that the Biden Inflation Reduction Act was passed, but it left Americans in no confusion about what it was that they were being asked to vote on.
But this is where the media's role is fascinating, because they, to Abe's earlier point about stories, it's not just stories that are tilted by ideological slants, but ones that are never reported out. And it was only in the immediate lead up to the election, and now just after, that the mainstream media has had to acknowledge that, say, like, one electric charging vehicle station has been built when, multi-millions of dollars were spent on this. The people who were promised broadband still haven't gotten it. And I think that's why you see people like Senator Chuck Schumer going on cable television and saying, the reason we were rejected wasn't our policies. It's that the people just haven't felt how good our policies really were for them. We're long-term thinkers. And it's ridiculous. But that's the piece where we'll see how the mainstream media versus all the alternative media that Trump spent a lot of time campaigning on during the election, how that will report on policy, because that's not a strength of the alternative media, I've got to say. That's where old school mainstream media that has reporters who go to the hearings and report on what's going on Capitol Hill matter. And they're not going to like anything coming out of a Republican-dominated Congress. So we'll see how they treat that in the Trump term.
I think it's also worth pointing out that the first Trump term at the beginning of 2017 was a wreck and a chaos. And clearly that...
One thing I notice about the news media is that they always... put a great value on the passing of legislation, but just because you pass legislation doesn't mean that you do anything to significantly improve the lives of Americans. All right, some legislation improves some lives, but it comes at an enormous cost to other lives, and often the implications of legislation are not seen for years down the road. So a do-nothing Congress, all right, to me, that's far superior to an activist Congress that does things that take America in a destructive direction. Now, how long till Donald Trump starts self-destructing? Right, Donald Trump, as I'm aware of him, is quite prone to self-destructive behavior, and he has seemed to have been absent from that since winning this presidential election. I like how he's largely stayed off TV and just allowed the system that he set up to work. I'm just concerned. How long is it going to be till we see Trump self-destructing, as he is so often
And I'm Laura
done?
Ingraham. This is the Ingram Angle from Washington tonight. As always, thank you for joining us. And at this hour, President Biden is in New Orleans. He's headed to a prayer service for the 14 victims of that horrific terror attack, as we get the disturbing new details about how this all happened. But first, new year, new wins. That's the focus of tonight's angle. All right, I hope you all had a blessed Christmas and a happy new year. Our family, and I hope yours, felt like we all had a lot to celebrate and be grateful for. But I hope you also got some rest, too, because after the last 4 years, hey, we all needed it, even Zoe. But now we're done with being on the defensive, and we're all ready to get to work. Right now, tonight, America is in the strongest position that we've been in decades to be able to restore the country and return power back to the people where it always belonged. The election was certified today, and Kamala had to preside.
The votes for President of the United States are as follows. Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 312 votes. Kamala D. Harris of the state of California has received 226 votes.
It was a sight to behold. Now, Democrats spent over $1 billion. They threw everything they could at Trump, tried to put him in.
Okay, there's a fun Tucker Carlson interview of Billy Bush that I enjoyed today. So Billy Bush, he was the bloke who was on the van in that Access Hollywood tape where Trump says these outlandish things about women who are very attracted to him, how he can just move on them and grab them by the pussy.
Shrinking, and the gains are shrinking. People are just terrified. They're looking over the shoulder. They're wondering, am I the next to get fired? So,
I mean, that's absolutely right. I forgot Seinfeld was a bomb at first.
It was not doing well.
I totally forgot that.
Imagine someone pulling that off the air. They would do it now. It didn't work after 2 episodes or 3 episodes. Right. This didn't work after a year or 2 years.
It's incredible.
Right?
They had the runway, though, because they were making so much money. NBC was making money in every category then.
And it had some good lead in and all that stuff. And then they stuck with it. And now it's, makes more money in reruns still than most original shows.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
You've been in TV for like 30 years, or in broadcasting certainly for 30 years.
Yeah.
I still think, though, even when the business was making a ton of money, it was a dishonest business. That's the way it felt to me anyway when I started at CNN.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I look at all the...
So if you're going to say TV is a dishonest business where everybody's lying, that's due to the medium, that's due to the situation, that's due to the peculiarities of that particular business. So if you talk to developers, all right, people who are building homes or repairing homes, they're constantly lying about how long till something will be fixed or how long till something will be ready, because they are reacting to incentives. So it's not like, the people in TV, there's just something uniquely bad about them. They are reacting to the incentives for how that
they
business
hire
works.
Megyn. She's got a kind of
fired by the same man that fired me. And instead of saying, hey, the ratings don't match the $40 million a year budget or whatever it is, they fire Megyn for asking a question about when blackface fell out of vogue or was not acceptable at all for Halloween and things. I mean, remember, think of all the late night comics who are working today that used to regularly do blackface on their shows, okay? And there was a time where if a girl dressed up as Diana Ross, it was like she legitimately loved Diana Ross, but then... she's all Megyn.
Right, blackface only became socially unacceptable 15 years ago.
And did was ask the question, give me a year or a period when that became absolutely unacceptable to the point that your career and everything will be taken.
So asking that was the equivalent of like lynching a bunch of people in Mississippi.
Yeah, and they trucked out, different people from the network, and Al Roker and Craig Melvin came out and they did a show and they talked about how horrible it was.
Get Kip
and so
back onto the show. What's going on, Kip?
Hey, buddy. So you had the 3-day crud, about 72 hours worth of it.
Yeah, sure felt that way.
Did you? I can usually tell when I'm getting sick because my throat will feel funny, or like my cigarettes, my food, the stuff I drink, it'll all start tasting funny. What, did you get some of that?
Yeah, I had like a week prior to actually getting sick where I was just particularly prone to headaches and just, periodic bouts of weakness and just not feeling good. So I felt like there was a week run up before I finally got sick where I just wasn't feeling that great.
Well, you have said historically, whenever your sleep's off, it manifests itself in headaches. So I imagine you were messing up on your sleep.
I was thinking that, but then sometimes it's not the sleep. Sometimes it's just you're coming down with the flu.
10-4. I had written down about, I don't know, 2 years ago, my dad was telling me, there's just so many Mexicans and Guatemalans and Hondurans coming across the border, and nobody will do anything. And I don't even have cable, so this was all news to me. And he was saying, and the governor's trying to stop it or whatever, and the president's threatening to do stuff against the Texas governor. And I'm like, what? It all just sounded like something off of Jerry Springer to me. It didn't even sound real. So I remember writing down, trying to calm him down by us writing down the reasons, maybe the 7 reasons why this was happening. And I wanted you can tell me which one of these 7 reasons you think it was. Or one of them was, I wrote vitality, that somebody at the highest level figure we don't have any more vitality left. We're out of grit and we need to be swapped out.
Wait. So what the reason for what is happening?
For the reason why he was saying tens of millions of people had come across the border, in the last couple of years, Okay. So with the government seeming to be down with it, you get what I'm saying, Luke?
Yeah.
And so as an exercise, try to take his mind off of it. What was the reasons? Well, he thought it was votes for Democrats. And I thought it must be more related to lack of vitality, lack of grit with the existing stock of Americans. But then I wrote down some other potentials: future Social Security payers, payers into the system. More people equals more GDP. Another one I wrote down was more cheap labor. Another one I wrote down, being a little bit sarcastic, too white, bro. Need to darken it up, not quite dark enough. And the last one was the old adage of, you're never just going along, you're either growing or you're dying. So by definition, we would rather have them just pouring across the border by the millions, so we're growing instead of just getting old and dying. So of those 7, how many would you agree with as to the reason?
None of them. So I it's been going on for many decades, so it's not something that's new. And preventing it would require really strong efforts and expense, because the incentives to move here are huge, right? For most people who have the potential to move here, they get access to a better life. So you really have to, because the incentives to move here are so large, you really have to go to great efforts to prevent it. So it's a difficult problem to stop, and there hasn't been a sufficient appetite on the part of politicians reflecting the American public to shut it down. Now, Eisenhower did send back 500,000 or 1 million Mexicans who are in the country illegally, but enough people were getting advantages from it. So businesses and people in the middle class got to hire cheap nannies. Farms got to hire cheap labor. Construction got to hire cheap labor. And the harms that were committed were usually not highly concentrated in a significant number of people. So by and large, the harms primarily accrued to border states, and not just to all people in border states, but just to some people. So the benefits of illegal immigration were concentrated so that
I can't hear you.
What the hell? The harms from illegal immigration were sufficiently narrow until the last 2 decades that there wasn't sufficient incentives for people to organize against it. So now there is a very strong anti-illegal immigration movement. But yet, at the same time, still most Americans seem to be on board with legal immigration. So they're simply lacking sufficient incentives to do something which is difficult, which is to restrict illegal access to the country. So I see it as in structural reasons, not more mystical reasons.
Right. It just I don't know. We've talked before about getting your algorithm fucked up, and I recently fucked up my algorithm by looking at too many cop videos where they pulled people over. And speaking of being mystified, cops are mystified when the person they have in front of them is not on the APHIS system. Well, they don't know what to do with them because they got this procedure they're supposed to follow. And so many times now they got fake IDs, and the person, he might be some Guatemalan or whatever. He's nowhere in the system. So you would think the corporations might have their own interests, but you would think the states would do better. They would do better of taking care of their communities if they had some sort of account of who the fuck is in their state. Don't you agree, Luke?
Yeah. And if we had a unitary system, so for example, the whole English political system is based on the ability to go to war with France, because England and France have fought continual wars for hundreds and hundreds of years. So you've got a unitary top-down system where a small number of people at the top decide policy, and then the rest of the system just carries it out. We have the opposite of that. And so there are good points and bad points about a unitary system versus a federal system. We have power widely dispersed, and it makes it more difficult to pass legislation and to get things done, of which there are benefits to that, and there are also detriments. So yeah, if we had an English unitary system, well, England has a unitary English system, and they have done a terrible job with regard to immigration. So theoretically, if we had a unitary system, it'd be easier to get this done.
Mm-hmm. You and I, we both hear of this bloodthirsty history of England and France. But when I think about the little beret-wearing dudes eating baguettes, sitting out there smoking cigarettes in their outdoor cafes in Paris, they don't strike fear in you, do they? Nor does the average Brit. They just don't strike fear in you. These whatever stock they came from, there's just none of that left, or you just got to piss them off real good to get it out of them. What do you think? You get what I'm saying? The legend doesn't really stack up compared to what you see over there across the pond in reality. You get what I'm saying, Luke?
Yeah, and I don't buy it. The English ruled the world until about 200 years ago, so they certainly know how to fight. They were pretty effective fighters in World War I and World War II. The French, a mixed bag. Unfortunately, they've developed a lousy reputation in large part because of the early days of World War II, where Hitler sent his best troops, and France had the bad luck to have aligned their worst troops where Hitler's best troops were going through. So if France had placed its best troops where Germany's best troops were trying to invade, then France would have thrashed Germany and ended that war in 1940. So the French know how to fight. They have mixed success, but at one point they dominated Europe. Why did France dominate Europe in 1808 or 1812 and they don't now? Population size and economy size vis-a-vis their rivals. So when France had a bigger population vis-a-vis its rivals, and a more prosperous and dominant economy, they were able to rule Europe. So I don't think there's something inherent in the French genetic pool that makes them poor fighters, because they dominated the European continent not long ago. So the population has decreased vis-a-vis much of the rest of Europe, certainly since the situation at the beginning of the 19th century. So France has had long periods of time where they were absolutely a phenomenal fighting power. And just because you have a particular image of some guy wearing something in a coffee shop, I don't think that's a powerful indicator of what France is capable of. And the French are one of those few countries that love being French, and where they're pretty happy being French, and they seem to have a style of life that suits most people in France, and they seem to be pretty well suited for the years ahead. So I wouldn't count France out. They have much better demographics, and they have a much better economic situation facing them in the years ahead than, say, Germany or the United Kingdom.
Did you ever see that documentary Orson Welles did so many years ago on the Basque people up around where Spain and France come together?
No.
You should check that out sometime. He really makes you want to be a part of that. There was a purity to those times, whenever that was. I imagine it was like before the war or whatever. But yeah, I heard Steve, in your absence, man's got to have something to do while he's washing the dishes. You know what I'm saying? So I heard Stephen J. James and Claire Carl rapping, while I was doing some dishes. And it occurred to me that I might be what Stephen J. James was referring to as a doomer. That's a hell of an epiphany, isn't it, Luke Ford?
I've been saying that as long as we've been talking. You never vibrate joy and enthusiasm about your country.
Well, they weren't talking about me. These are just, you think things when you're doing those dishes. Nobody. I would hope they would think of me as something other than a doomer. But anyway, it occurred to me by definition as they were speaking, and they tend to, it apparently is some sort of condition that seems to be caught by the older people who remember, let's just say, the olden days. We must be more prone to that condition. Which, how old is Claire Call herself? She's no spring chicken.
Yeah, I'd say early 50s.
Okay, she's somewhere close to our age. Okay, so what should one do to, say, resist this said impulse when none of my gauges, if I was a little fighter pilot, looking at all my gauges, they all look bad. The conditions don't look as good as they used to. So, what solution should a man focus on if he sort of feels that steamroller of misery is brewing? What do you do to inspire the young people? How do you be an anti-doomer? If you see the lawfare that they did to Trump, if you see the rot in the colleges and even in the public schools, if you see what must be a futile future for the young people. I'm not a young person, so I'm just saying, if you see that, well, what are we supposed to do? Plaster a smile on our face or focus on the brighter side of life?
You look at people who are happy and thriving in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and these are people who are deeply enmeshed in the lives of other members of their family, extended family, friends, community, religion, career, and interests. So the more things that you have to be passionate about, the more of a live wire you'll be, and the less likely you are to be a doomer. So I love cricket, right? The more things that you're passionate about that are not bad for you, the better. Like, I love sports, I love cricket, I love my religion, I love history, I love economics, I love philosophy, I love psychology, I love talking to people in my community, I love stand-up comedy. I try to love as much of life as possible. And so most people are primarily concerned about their family and extended family and their friends and the community, and that's where life should be lived. Most people should not be thinking about lawfare against Donald Trump. Number one, there's nothing you can do about it. Number two, you're not likely to have much expertise in the topic. The only reason that one should be thinking about the abstract issues that you just listed off is because you enjoy learning about those abstract issues. And so if you enjoy learning about those abstract issues, you should be evincing joy because you're doing what you love. You may feel, you meaning the generic you, not necessarily you, Kip. If someone is feeling doom because of the issues you just listed off, it has absolutely nothing to do with those issues, but they have a personality that is addicted to feeling doom. And so they just search out reasons to justify how they feel. I love politics, all right? I love the issues that you just discussed, and it brings me joy to try to understand them and try to understand the world around me. And the person who just feels like all is hopeless and doomed, it has nothing to do with the ostensible issues that they are going to raise. People rarely say what they mean, rarely mean what they say. And so if you get to study things that you love, you should be expressing joy. If you're not filled with joy when you get to use your discretionary time doing what you want to do and learning about what you want to learn, then it has nothing to do with the intrinsic issues themselves. It's all about some kind of internal addiction to doom, and these external things are just playthings in which you get to live out your own self-defeating pathologies.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think it was like, 1978. My dad had a friend named Dale. He bought me this little thick book. It was thick like a Bible, both Testaments, but it was called a World Book and Almanac. You ever heard of a almanac? You remember those in the 70s and 80s?
Yes.
Okay. So anyway, my restless mind, it loved that book, Luke Ford. And I had to buy another one in 79 and 1980 and 1981 and on and on and on until I turned into either became an adult or we finally had the computer, which was basically a walking, talking almanac. But anyway, that kind of enjoyment, it helped me as a time when I was a kid from spinning off into thinking about a million things. I could just focus on the 100 biggest cities or, all this kind of just trivia is what it was in essence. But I don't know, that same trivia sort of haunts me because those numbers are still there. It helps me remember like what the difference is, say, that people had to struggle with before versus now. So like when you think back to 1940, the average house was $2,900, and just to be fair on that, the average fella only got paid like $1,400 a year, not a month, a year, Luke Ford. But if you do those calculations forward, you find out that the price of the house is up 150, 160 times what it was in 1940, but the pay is only up 30 or 40 times, maybe 50 times, what it was in that time frame. So I don't know, that part of how do I, knowing what I know of how the deck is sort of stacked against the young people, and can't help but notice some of them are sissies, and can't help but notice that so many of them don't have grit. How do you plaster a smile on your face and spin that into a positive and go coach them up to go out there and kick ass?
Well, how could you be going out there coaching people up? Like who seriously would want to be as filled with doom and pessimism as you? That's absurd.
No.
You want to feel doom, and you will find every reason that you can to feel doomed, and then you say, how do I put a smile on my face? But people don't experience life exactly as you do. I know for you, owning property and owning a home is the quintessence of being human. it's not something of great value to me. So the thing that is like vitally important to you, own property, own your own home. For some people, it's like growing your own vegetables. These things don't mean anything to me. So you can come up with ways where life is worse now. You could equally come up with ways for how life is better now, but you never do that because you're addicted to doom. You could come up with 27 reasons why life is so much better now. Many young people today, they would be dead 40 years ago because they needed the medical advances that we've had in the past 40 years. And there are going to be other opportunities that are available, such as the internet, that weren't around back then. So you can look out on the world and you can see everything that's wrong with it, or you can see everything that's right with it. And we have some choices, right? There are some ways that life is inferior now to what the quality of life was like in 1965. So there's a lot more crime in Los Angeles, for example, and there's much less social cohesion and much less social trust, and there's far more immigration, and we have less in common with our fellow citizens, right? Those are all bad things, and I would like to see some progress reversing many of those bad things. But you can also come up with ways that life is much better now. We have much better medical care available. We have many more opportunities, such as in the information internet space. You can devote yourself to learning about any topic at very little price. Just you can find stuff on the internet. You can communicate your ideas to anywhere in the world. You can meet people from all over the world who share your interests. So people in Europe, they can easily travel between countries. So some things have been made a lot easier. And so there are ways that life is better now. There are ways that life is worse. And if one only sees that which is better, then you're probably looking at the world through a positive lens where you want to focus on what's positive. And if you only see the ways that life is worse now than it was, then there's some kind of addiction to doom operating in your system.
Right. I think maybe you're misconstruing the point I'm trying to get at, which is what would a fella do if he's trying to inspire younger people to try to believe in the American dream again, or make self-respecting white women be hip to the idea of breeding again, or make the education system about excellence instead of conformity and virtue signaling, or somehow...
Well, you can't do anything that you don't already buy into, and you don't buy into these things. You don't believe in the American dream yourself, so you can never convince anyone of something that you don't already buy into. You seem to have chosen a largely isolated life, so you're not going to be out there connecting and vibrating with joy because it's just not who you are and it's not where you're at. I mean, you're addicted to doom. You're not going to be able to plaster a smile on an addiction to doom.
I get out there and try to spread sunshine and joy amongst all those Episcopalian students at the college. You know, it's usually their professors that I end up arguing with, but I try to be sweet to them, you know, because they are the future, Luke Ford.
Right, but people are going to sense your doom. You can't just put on a performance and hope to fool people. People get a very quick sense of what's really going on with you, and so you never have anything positive to say about America. That's going to shine through, no matter how much you try to disguise it.
Not true. They were one of the best bands of the 70s. Ventura Highway, among others. Lonely People. I mean, good Lord, there was a number of great things about America. Don't you remember that band?
How can you go to How can you go to an American grocery store and just not be amazed at what's available and at such reasonable prices? I mean, just the gigantic, plethora of choices that one has just going to a typical American large grocery store. It's an amazing experience. I was looking forward to it when I grew up in Australia. My dad would tell me about what it was like to go shopping in an American grocery store.
Yes, I would say that's probably the single biggest thing that people take for granted. Wouldn't you agree? Is our grocery store experience, and the fact that there's a whole orchestra going on to get that done for you. You know, it goes on 24 hours a day. You know, it starts way out there in the fields, and they get everything picked and set out there for you. You know, Walmart is a pretty good experience, but a better grocery store like Publix, man, it's awesome to see the variety that we get. Because, you know, we saw the pictures back in the 70s and 80s of what a Soviet grocery store looked like. And I think when those Russian people, when they come to America, it's not the In-N-Out burger that gets them. It's that first trip to the grocery store where they're like, holy shit, this is awesome. You agree?
Well, for some people, it depends on your priorities. So I was perhaps more excited about a bigger library, or just the books that were available. I just love American history, so I like the grocery store. I was excited about it. It just depends on what cranks your engine. So for me, it's books and ideas and the culture of free discussion. The First Amendment is just an incredible bulwark in the United States compared to other countries.
Mm-hmm. I was mentioning to you the effect of my first almanac, and I don't know, maybe that guy Dale saw my inner torment or whatever, and he could relate to it. But did somebody ever pass along to you, you know, something like that had a lot of it affected you a lot psychologically, but it was just a simple gesture, you know, but you were like, wow, I didn't know how great this thing was, but I should have had this thing in my life a whole lot sooner. Now I'm talking about things other than porn. Look forward, get your mind out of the gutter. Can you think of anything that relates to you that way?
Yeah, I've experienced a lot of kindness. I got excited about all sorts of books. I mean, anyone who's introduced me to a great book, I mean, that's always made me very excited from about age 7 on. I think it was about age 7 that I started going to people's homes and borrowing books, reading them promptly, returning them. So just many exciting worlds opened up to me when I found books that I loved.
Mm-hmm. You know, I had a real visceral negative reaction to somebody that's been on your stream within the past couple of weeks. His name's John Vance. Do you remember that fella?
Yes.
Canadian John Vance?
Yes.
I don't know. Again, it was one of those nights where you were off duty. So I had to look elsewhere, and it was a stream, and Stephen J. James had popped into that stream. And then somewhere along the line, it was one of these streams that had so many voices that you were kind of getting confused was what was going on. But there again, there was some good points being made. But then John Vance enters the stream. And he started out with a flat earth soliloquy. And then he went into like a moon landing hoax. And I don't know, Stephen J. James, people undersell that guy. He had a sixth sense, and he instantly, within like 45 seconds of him going into the second subject, Stephen J. James just basically said, I'm out of here. And that guy derailed that whole stream in about 5.5 minutes with just horse shit. And I figured you might be the guy to ask, what's he getting out of that? Is this just something John enjoys? Because really, when I think of Canada, I think about who was the father on the Growing Pains show? What was that guy's name?
Never watched it.
Oh, okay. I think about Norm Macdonald. I think about, some of the great Jim Carrey. We used to have some decent imports come from Canada. But then it's like, what the fuck are they teaching them? Has their education gotten in worse shape than ours is? What the hell's John talking about? Because it made me feel mad for him taking up space in my head and stuff. And I know it becomes a me problem at that point. So just tell me, what's in it for a John? Well, why does he derail a perfectly good stream like that? What's going on there? What am I missing?
Well, this is the perils of the e-personality. He found some joy and some attention and some community through saying things online and joining a bunch of edgy people. He converted to Islam. He's obviously a troubled soul on the margins of society, and trying to hold himself together through all his suffering by telling himself, well, at least I see through the bullshit of the moon landing hoax, and we're really living in a flat earth, and Islam is divine truth. And people who aren't connected to other people, they have to connect to something. And so one of the things that they connect to is conspiracy theories, or they connect to drugs or to some other crutch. Yeah.
Well, but there's enough of them there. There's enough of those crazies where they should have clubs where they can get together and organize bumper stickers and parades and stuff for that crazy shit. I don't know.
Well, obviously, anyone with these views can't organize because only people who are equally dysfunctional are going to give them the time of day. So this is the biggest problem with being a conspiracy theorist and this kind of antisocial, marginalized underearner, is that anyone with anything going on is not going to give you the time of day. So only other marginalized losers are going to hang out with you, and marginalized losers aren't going to organize anything.
But what is it? Why is it that I felt kind of defrauded and cut to the quick? What is it about, what kind of character defect was in me was exposed there where I couldn't
Well, you were looking for something exciting and edgy rather than looking for something of good nutrition value. I mean, there are so many high quality options online. I mean, you can take a class in Shakespeare from Yale or Harvard. You can learn about the world's religions. You can study mysticism. There are a lot of high quality videos out there online when you just want something to take your mind off. But you probably wanted something that was a little bit exciting, a little bit edgy, and you weren't optimizing for truth and profundity. You were probably optimizing for something that would give you certain feelings, and you paid the price by not optimizing for truth and profundity and optimizing instead for edginess.
In my defense, it was a pretty good conversation. Not that I wasn't involved in it, but I was just listening. It was a pretty good conversation until he got in there and derailed it. There was some decent points, but it was all lost. It was like my mind just wanted to distance itself from the whole podcast. But it wasn't those other people. It was that one guy. It was that one dude that just blew it up.
This takes one person
or something. Yeah.
Yep. One person enters a room and puts out a stink, and it will just destroy. That's why it's really important to have very strong boundaries and to recognize, all right, this person's poison for you, and if you stumble onto any online content where he's participating, you should know that you just turn that off and choose something else. And so it's important to be very careful about the people that we allow into our lives, and to be ready to just tune marginalized losers out of our life in general, unless there are rare exceptional circumstances.
Well, you hit it. That's what I felt like, a sucker playing 3-card Monte or something, because I didn't know John's game. You know what I mean? He's Canadian, for God's sakes. You can't even tell they're any different from an American unless they say the word out or about. They can't say those two particular words for some reason. But anyway, I was going to ask you before I get off here, can you tell me the 5 most effective people, or just some of the most effective people, thought leaders on the right? Because I definitely have seen you advise us who not to be listening to, but I've never heard the ones that you're giving the Luke Ford seal of approval on the right.
I think a lot of what Amy Wax says is pretty good stuff. Steve Saylor, Charles Murray, a lot of the people around Claremont Institute, Paul Gottfried, people around Paul Gottfried, and some people around Claremont. So Stephen Turner is a philosopher of the social sciences. I don't have a long list.
Yeah, you do notice some of those Amy Wax, Charles Murray, they're getting a little long on the Paul Godfrey, they're getting a little long on the tooth. Uh, I don't know. I heard some discussion. It was about, I don't know, a year or two old, but it was like, the left will put statues up of anybody. George Floyd or downtown Columbus, Ohio has Arnold Schwarzenegger. Downtown Philadelphia has Sylvester Stallone, for God's sakes. At what point do we need to start putting maybe some thought leaders from the right, or even who could be some thought leaders from the right, that we need to get people, now that we got some people on the right with some money, like some Elon types, we need to get some endowments and some statues up and some, hey, you ought to be like this guy or that guy. Get some people those young kids can look up to. What's your thoughts on something like that? Who deserves it?
Yeah, to get anything done in the world, you have to organize. To organize, it means you have to be able to get along with other people. To get along with other people, you have to be able to put your own eccentricities and ego on the down low to work effectively with other people. So organization is the key. And most people on the dissident right are antisocial in personality, so they're never going to be able to build anything. But join an organization. So join a traditional religious organization is the most commonly available. And then you support people. I subscribe to the Claremont Review of Books. I subscribe to Steve Saylor's Substack. All right, I support various people on Substack because I appreciate their analysis. So organization, for a long time I was part of the Republican Jewish Coalition. There are organizations to join because it takes an organization to get anything done. Just one person isn't going to make much of a difference in the world. You have to become organized, and that requires certain disciplines of the personality that are not congenial for many.
Mm-hmm. Ron Paul, would you think a figure like that deserves a statue? I kind of think of him as maybe being the impetus of the movement that eventually brought us Trump. Would you agree or disagree with that sentiment?
I don't know enough about Ron Paul. I'm sure there's some. I've just never been that excited about him, nor that opposed to him. I'm sure he's got some positive qualities, but he's never been someone who I found compelling that I wanted to know more about.
Is there a figure that you think deserved to be bronzed? I heard that particular group did mention the name Thomas Sowell. I don't get excited about him, but apparently he does have more mass appeal. Or can you think of a figure that deserves to be seen in bronze?
Yeah,
George Floyd.
Yeah, I don't think in those terms. Other people would do that better than me. But I've read probably a dozen of Tom Sowell's books and appreciated every single one of them. So I think Tom Sowell did valuable work. But I don't think in terms of statutes and valorizing people, because I expect that everyone is deeply flawed, and I'm not. I don't talk much about good guys and bad guys. Right? Mm-hmm. I don't talk, this is a great guy, this is a bad guy. I don't really talk in those terms because people are so complicated and people change dramatically depending on situation. So
right. I'm just wondering if we've I think we've reached the point in society where unless it's like a sports figure or a movie star, nobody's going to agree that somebody's great. So it's going to take somebody like a Elon offering to put up money and somebody like Trump saying, hey, let's put some of those statues on my properties. They would look good. They would be, and of course it would give the left the opportunity to try to defile the statues the same way we do to their queer, colorful crosswalks, so it would be a tit for tat in that manner. But I don't know. I just I see there's things that the left does that the right doesn't necessarily have a counter for,
Yeah, well,
but,
there are things that the left does that, the right doesn't have accounted for. There are many areas where the left is stronger, but the world is incredibly unpredictable. No one would have foreseen the rise of Donald Trump in 2014. So I don't think in terms of statutes and earthly glory. I mainly venerate people who pursue truth, important truths, and strive to express them in terms that a significant audience of truth-seeking people can appreciate.
Did you get a kick out of the old "He Will Not Divide Us" saga that went on a few years ago?
I was vaguely aware of it, but I'm not someone who gets kicks out of these things. I get kicks out of ideas or insights or information that I haven't previously learned about. I don't tend to get a lot of kicks over memes.
I don't know if it was Internet Historian or somebody did a hell of a good bunch of videos on that I got some legitimate belly rolls, laughs out of, and that doesn't happen very often for me. So that was good stuff. Any comment on the 9 new BRICS nations?
No, I don't really think much about BRICS. I don't think they're a strong competitor to the United States and the U.S. dollar. They seem pretty inconsequential to me.
Yeah, I noticed Cuba was on the list, Bolivia was on the list, and then Thailand was on the list. That was noteworthy. And then I believe there was a couple of stands, Kazakhstan and maybe one other of the stand nations, but 9 in total. So I don't know. When you look at it on a map, it's starting to get a little more colorful on the map for the other team. But I guess that's about all I had, unless you had any rapping you want to do with me.
No, I'm good for right now, Kip. I'm just coming back from illness, so let's leave it there.
Yeah. Ease on back into the news. Keep us fed. We got 3 days where we hadn't been fed from the Luke Ford diet. All right, see you, bro.
Thanks, bro. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Sent Megyn on her way. What Megyn did, I think, is what you did, and said, absolutely not. You'll pay me out in full. My contract will be paid. And I think Megyn got all $60-some million or whatever it was to then go off and build what she's built, which is pretty awesome.
She's tough. She's a tough woman.
She's tough.
And she got tougher going through that. And I think, like a lot of people I've known, you either become a better person or a worse person. And she became, I think, a better person.
Yeah.
Which is a wonderful person. One of my favorite people, actually. So I think it was, a huge victory for her on every level.
I don't know about you, but I sometimes fantasize about, how great life must be if I was in this situation, or let's say I had a network TV show or a nationally syndicated radio show, or I was the editor of this publication, or if I was just married to this woman. But all these things come with enormous prices. There are many benefits to being part of a larger organization, but they also come with severe consequences as well. You lose a great deal of freedom when you work for a bigger organization. And so it was devastating to Megyn Kelly when she lost her place at NBC for asking such a commonsensical question. When did it become unacceptable to dress in blackface? But she was not a good fit for the NBC News culture, and she seems to be thriving now, going out on her own. So some people aren't organization men. Prior to the 1970s, most Americans wanted to work for a big organization, one organization their entire life. But some people are not exactly cut out for working for organizations.
Level.
I was proud of her. She didn't do anything wrong, but ask a question.
I know.
She never said, we should be allowed to do blackface again. She didn't say that.
Yeah.
She said, all she did was raise the question. Now remember, this is also retribution. The man that was the chairman of NBC News at the time who fired her, she had recently put out, an email calling him a liar.
Who was that?
To the staff, Andy Lack. She called Andy Lack a liar because she's.
Yeah, if you call your boss a liar, that doesn't tend to lead to a long corporate trajectory.
Said, wait a minute, we have someone who has corroborated, Rose McGowan, the actress, who corroborated that, this in the Me Too movement in this whole Weinstein case.
So just to refresh for people who don't recall, the allegation was, and I think it was true, that NBC had the goods on Harvey Weinstein, that he was behaving in an abusive way, in a legit abusive way toward women.
Yeah,
and
Ronan
that they
Farrow was doing his report. Yeah.
And they sat on it?
And Ronan alleges that they sat on it and said,
So I see all sorts of people who are really good at playing the game, and I will find myself at my weaker moments. Why haven't I been as successful as them? And damn those careerists! They just put their career first, and they put the pursuit of truth second. But there's a price to be paid often for success. Often you have to say ridiculous things to show that you're one of the club. So a good thing about growing older is that I'm more and more capable of standing on my own 2 feet, and I'm able to make choices based on how I feel about myself and how much I respect myself, and I live less and less in a fantasy world of, oh my God, if I only had a show on some nationally syndicated program.
You don't have enough. You don't have anyone who's on camera and in name. And Megyn said, wait a minute. Yeah, Rose McGowan, in camera, on camera, in name. We've got a name. She'll go. And they, I guess, overlooked that and or refused to acknowledge it. And
the chat says Joe Rogan shows a lot of dumb content. Yes, it does. It's Joe Rogan does not come across in an impressive fashion, right? Much of the show is moronic. And it's a lot easier to get a large audience when you are appealing to the average IQ of the audience is something like 98, as opposed to, say, 120. Right? This show probably aims at an average IQ audience of about 120, and there are far fewer people available for this kind of more intellectually demanding show than for most of Joe Rogan's 98 IQ shows, or Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop, 98 IQ, or Oprah Winfrey, again, aiming at that 100 IQ level, or Brene Brown, aiming at that 100 IQ level, or Ta-Nehisi Coates, or who's that bloke who got millions and millions of dollars for saying that all disparities between groups are the result of white racism. Right? These moronic messages resonate with people with average IQs who feel good when they hear something that makes them feel good.
So, but the idea was that, the guy who was president of NBC News at the time is Noah Oppenheim, and he's a scriptwriter. He's really a scriptwriter. And he's does he want to write scripts for Harvey? Who knows? But there's that relationship, and Harvey, was never afraid to pick up the phone. I've had Harvey Weinstein call me. This is a great film. You should have this on your show on Access Hollywood when I was the host. Hammering me to have he was an animal.
And everyone knew it, but the incentives were aligned that it would take a great amount of work, and you would risk your happiness and your welfare trying to document Harvey Weinstein's abuses. So no one pulled it off until the New York Times, the New Yorker, finally pulled it off approximately 12 years ago.
So it seems very likely that he was applying pressure to executives at NBC, including Noah Oppenheim. Yeah, it seems likely.
You have to assume. Well, he would apply pressure to anyone. If little Billy Bush over at Access Hollywood is getting pressure, then you know that Today Show is.
For sure. So Megyn pipes up and says, actually, Andy Lack, her boss, what you're saying is not quite right, and they decide we got to kill this woman.
Yeah, so it's retribution. Clean and simple retribution. And I'm sure Megyn's lawyer, Brian Friedman, who's one of the best, lawyers in this game, turned and said, oh, no, you're not going to just, she has done absolutely nothing wrong. Nice try. You can try and brand her a racist, which she is not, for asking a question, but you were going to pay her out in full. And then she's going to go build her own network. And by the way, I saw her last week that Megyn surpassed NBC News in YouTube views on her own.
That's so great.
So she was crowing about that, and I have to say I smiled. I'm in the comments section if you look down, by the way. Way to go, girl.
I love it. So why, and I had forgotten this part of it, Al Roker and Craig Melvin are two hosts on NBC, both black, and they torpedoed Megyn?
Look, they play ball or not, right? I mean, they were asked to appear and talk about the severity of it, and this is when you're in the machine
of it,
the severity of blackface and appropriation and all these things. Look, these types of situations are offered to you, right? I mean, play ball with the big machine, or maybe you're out next too. I will say this: Craig Melvin is a really good guy. I like him a lot. For the 2 months that I was at the Today Show, he had the office next to mine. and we would call in response, sing. I liked the guy so much, I would go, it's a beautiful morning, and then he would finish the lyric, and he was just a charmingly lovely guy. Roker, on the other hand, is a bit vindictive. He's not jovial. He's
no, because you do think fat people are jovial, just by definition.
So success in organizations depends upon a personality that's willing to bend to performing what the organization wants. And Patrice O'Neill had a pretty keen understanding of the price often paid for success means giving up your dignity and your soul. Doggone it. Here we go.
Character when you hit it. So I'm saying, the point I'm making is, maybe I'm antiquated. Maybe I'm thinking old, because I don't think kids should work in coal mines.
Yeah.
But I do think kids should get hit. But now you can't even tease kids in school. It's bullying and
bullying. Very important.
So
yeah.
Maybe it's right. Maybe the way the world's going is right. Maybe no bullying. No, because my stepkid was getting bullied in school. My instinct was, hey, tell her to ball her fucking fist up and knock this other bitch in her fucking teeth.
That's what we heard.
Her mother goes to the school, tells the principal, no more bullying. No more bullying. Because bullying is gone now. But is it right? Is it wrong? I don't know what's going on. So maybe being against it is the wrong thing. Maybe being anti the world becoming... I'm in BJ's. I saw a box of a toy kitchen. A boy was on the front. I wanted to scream at somebody. There's a little sissy on the box, on the fucking Easy Bake Oven box.
Yeah,
there's a boy.
You know what? I think we're becoming our parents.
What the fuck?
You're right. You can't wrap your head around something like that. You can't wrap your head around that.
So you can't even be angry. You can't quit. Look,
but someone has decided that's okay now in this society to put the boy on that box.
Them. Like, we answering to a them.
Yeah.
That's not even, we don't even know.
And we're not part of them. And that's our problem.
We are part of the them. The them is the collective.
Sure.
But who's Tracy? Who's LeBron apologized to? Hey, when they wake up, man, they're gonna be them. They're gonna just be
them.
Bubba. When they wake up in the morning, So LeBron, when you said that,
this is Tracy Morgan, and this was Patrice O'Neill on Opie and Anthony after. What's his name? Tracy Morgan had to make all these apologies to the gay community for saying that I think that he beat his boy if his boy came out as gay. So Tracy Morgan's just doing a comedic performance and says something about he didn't really want his son to grow up to be gay, and the entire LGBTQ organized anti-hate community came down on him, and Tracy Morgan had to make apology after apology.
Were you saying that you're better than people?
Oh, man.
He should look up in the sky for a second and go, yeah. Because let's be honest, I am.
Yes,
I am
compared to them. Yes,
I'm better than them.
Yeah.
I'm 25 and worth zillions of dollars for doing something that people are right now in the snow right now. They moved out, they shoveled pavement, and they built a hole in the wall, and they're practicing shooting just to be what I actually am. So how about this? If I'm not liked, how about everybody suck my dick? I got a good account. You can't get my dough. I got some gold buried somewhere. Y'all can suck my dick. You can talk about my mama too. I don't give a fuck. I'm 6'8". My dick is as long as a goddamn rowboat. I probably get my dick sucked in front of my wife. There's nothing she could do because she's a fucking loser.
But he backed off from his statement.
Yeah,
he should have went all in.
Of course he did.
No, I know. I understand.
Of course he backed up from his statement.
I like this a lot. I like it a lot because it's easy just to say that Tracy should be able to say whatever he wants on a comedy stage, but you really fucking painted the big picture here today,
dude.
Sir. We all think that, obviously.
This business is the beast.
Yeah.
And it eats everybody and shits them out. But here's what's funny about the beast. It's a never-ending line of people who want to get in the mouth and get chewed up and shit out.
Why is that?
It's because when you get in the belly, You get $2 million a week.
All right. Patrice O'Neill. All right, back to Billy Bush talking with Tucker.
Well,
I mean, I always assume that. Don't you?
Well,
like Santa Claus, kind of.
yeah, you're supposed to be.
Yeah,
Maybe
you're
that makes
supposed
you
to be.
mad. But although Al got himself in shape, however he did it, and
Oh, did he? I haven't seen. I don't have a TV.
well, he's listen. When I was at, I've written I have a great chapter that I wrote, and I wrote it years ago, so I wouldn't forget any details of what exactly happened with my firing. And it was just, it's unbelievable. I was playing catch up the whole time.
So we all say things privately that are pretty raunchy and as shocking as what Donald Trump said in the Access Hollywood tape, where he's talking specifically about women who are highly attracted to him. And it's true, if you're a celebrity and a woman is highly sexually attracted to you, you can't grab her by the pussy. That's the nature of reality. It's a shocking statement. Donald Trump was not talking about going out there and just grabbing the pussies of random women. He was talking specifically about the power of being a celebrity. When women are desperate to have sex with you, yeah, you can get away with grabbing them by the pussy. And he said these things to Billy Bush.
Found out that the Access Hollywood bus tape was in the NBC News building by Matt Lauer. Matt Lauer came to me after I got off the air at the Today Show on a Tuesday morning, and he said, "Hey, what are you going to do about the tape?" I said, "What? What do you mean, Matt?" And he said, the tape of the bus tape, you and Trump and the whole thing." I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, what do you mean? This, and I knew what I remembered the tape. It's 11 years old at the time.
So back up. Just start at the beginning of this story. What was this tape?
We should all be blessed with friends that we can say crazy things to, where we can just dump out stuff that we wouldn't want the world to hear, right? We should all have this privilege of a zone of privacy where we can say crazy things.
Tape. When was it shot? What is it?
It was shot in 2005. It was the end of Access Hollywood was rebuilding a studio, so we had to find a reason to get out of the studio. So we did Access across America. It started in Miami, and it goes to whatever, to Atlanta, and then it works its way back to Los Angeles, giving the studio people the workers enough time to finish a new studio. So it's just it was sponsored and the whole thing. But the last stop was pick up Donald Trump at the Beverly Hills Hotel in Los Angeles and drive him 20 minutes to the studio, deliver him, because he's going to make an appearance on Days of Our Lives, and he's going to be playing he's going to be playing a big, gaudy billionaire who gets hit on by, a young starlet. That's his.
I'm just thinking about very respectable people I've known in my life who've had positions of esteem in the community, right? Positions of considerable responsibility, who said things about blacks that essentially they were not big fans of black people, right? They would just say these things privately. They would never say them publicly. And then there are other people who will privately tell you they're not big fans of Jews or of gays or of any group, right? It would be weird, given what we know about people, that in addition to being predisposed positively to some people, that they are also predisposed negatively towards other people who are a threat to the type of community that they want to live in.
His character.
Oh.
You figure Donald should be able to pull this off. So the bus is pulling in, and the cameraman, the cameraman, get off the bus. We got to go down to the end so we can catch your arrival. So the cameramen get off, and they run 300 yards ahead while the bus is stopped, waiting to film its approach. Because the woman who he's going to be acting with is waiting. And
so I've been blogging since 1997, and I've usually been pretty upright and honorable, making it clear to people what was on and off the record. But there have been times where I was not honorable. I've never, to the best of my knowledge, told someone this is off the record and then used it. But I have written about my private life and my interactions, and so I don't think all of my selections of what I shared on my blog were always in the best taste. And sometimes I invaded people's privacy, and it was a mistake, and I shouldn't have done that. And I'd like to think that I've exercised consistently better judgment as the days have gone by. But in the early days of blogging, where I was just pouring more and more of my heart just onto the screen, I sometimes exercised some bad judgment and wasn't as respectful of people's privacy as I should have been.
And there's a welcoming crew from Days of Our Lives. They're all waiting, and this is the arrival shot. So the cameraman gets off. He never stops recording. So we're still sitting on the bus with the microphones, and he gets off. But it's the red light is still on, so the audio is still recording.
So in my younger days, I would have been really tempted to go with this sort of story, where people didn't know they were being recorded. And now, as I've gotten older and older, right, the more of a moral problem I have with it.
As the cameraman, runs away. Can't imagine worse luck, right? But who cares? It's just Donald Trump from The Apprentice.
And you're just doing this silly little thing.
This is 2005, and we're doing this silly arrival shot. Well, the Donald at that point, while we're waiting, he gets into what he likes to talk about. And you don't choose the agenda with Donald Trump. He talks at you, and he started by talking about my co-host Nancy O'Dell, and he, she's so hot. What happened at that? I handled that beautifully. And he keeps going.
I'm sorry.
Right, and it was hilarious where he said, I moved on her like a bitch. I was buying her furniture to try to get her to sleep with me. I mean, it was just hilarious, off the cuff, brutal honesty where he was telling on himself.
I'm just too amused.
He just starts talking, and well, everybody knows what he talked about. And then when we arrive to the shot, except for the end part, the most amazing thing about the whole famous line that starts with grab.
Yeah.
I just can't even say it because it's never funny to me. But the amazing part about all that is I have no recollection. The first time I ever heard that was 2016.
Of course.
Days before they fired me, because I always remembered it for the personal connection.
So I remember when I was running through my sexual inventory, it's a key part of the fourth step, where you look at how you've done harm in the sexual romantic realm. And I was confessing to someone in my 12-step program about how I'd often aggressively hit on women who were not pleased by my lack of discernment. So as I grew older, I was able to more effectively target my affections to only those women who were interested in receiving them. But when I was younger, I would broadcast my affections way too wildly. I remember I was working as an extra on one movie set, and I hit on every single woman on that set, and they pretty much all objected except for this one. So I was 27, she was 46. She ended up hitting on me at the end of that day's show. But all the younger ones that I'd hit on, they all complained and objected. So I'd broadcast my affections way too widely. And so I was going through a list of women who had protested that they felt unclean or disgusted or by the crudity of my advance. And this fellow guy in my 12-step program said, look, if men didn't hit on women, the race would not perpetuate itself. And you want to learn from the experience so that you do it more appropriately. But this is a basic desire that drives the human race and keeps it operating. So don't trash yourself, right? Just recognize how you can do things better going forward. So yeah, good advice. And it was such good advice that I've kept a recording of his message to me, so that haven't listened to it in years, but I've kept it because it was such common sense.
Him talking about taking Nancy O'Dell furniture shopping. And I thought, oh my God, that is so funny.
Wait, what?
Like he took Nancy O'Dell furniture shopping because he was trying to hook up with her, and he's like, here, I'll buy you this coffee table. I'll buy you an armoire. I was like, this is so absurd. It's oh my God.
Do you think it was true?
But here's the amazing thing. Oh yeah, definitely true. I got 100%. I got off the bus, and so the cameras are there. We returned to filming, and I'm like, hey, Donald, meet the person you're acting with. And the whole thing lines up and looks like I'm feeding a wolf to this, feeding this lovely damsel to this wolf after what has just been said, but no one knows what's just been said, and I don't even recall hearing the thing.
Of course
I didn't hear that till 11 years later. So it's just a giant shit show.
Well, but also you work in LA in the middle of Hollywood. Like, you hear a lot of stuff every day. I mean,
Julia Roberts has said worse to me. Not really, but
no, right. I mean, I know the world, and you were at the center of the world. So every day people are saying things they wouldn't want to be on camera.
Right. Yeah. But you also have this. We worked in this incredibly weird world where you have 10, 15 minutes, in my case, forever, because it was a drive across town, to really talk to someone before you talk to someone.
Yes, of
right.
course.
You and I chit-chatted for 15 minutes before we turned these microphones on. Just like, hey,
We've
you
been
doing? What's going
chit-chatting
on?
for
Like, how was
40
the
years.
drive?
Yeah, no,
but I've known you for a long time. But if you didn't know me, you would have that time
always
to establish a little rapport, and you meet them where they are.
Yeah.
So, and with him, you don't have a choice. It's never how's the wife and kids. There's never that. There's what I did the other day. Great shot over the bunker. You can only hope it's a golf day. But then listen, here's the amazing thing is after that happened, like if you want to look at I reported it. I didn't report it like he said terrible things on the bus. This is awful. I reported it ran upstairs to my boss and I go, oh my God, every time with Trump, it's something else. The animal, you wouldn't believe what he did. He tried to take Nancy O'Dell furniture shopping and so he could get laid. I was like, this is crazy. And I'm telling you, yeah, you're not going to believe this. The next day, that boss says, oh no, I heard the whole thing. What you told me yesterday. The guy was rolling. I said, he rolled on the tape. I said, well, you better do something with that tape. And the reason I said that was for nothing that I did, nothing that I was ashamed of. I don't care. The reason.
So it used to be almost all of my life, I would just visibly shudder when I recalled something that I'd said. It's like, oh, like I'd feel pain. The shudder would be so intense. Now, thanks to 12-step work, I think I shudder less. I have more acceptance that I was doing the best I could at the time with the tools that I had available to me, and where I can make amends, I want to make amends because it's really important for my own happiness and effectiveness in life that I want to go through each day feeling as clean as possible. And I've looked back through the archives of my blog, and sometimes I'll come across something that just makes me shudder. It's like, oh, that is terrible. Let me remove that. It's like, ugh. So much of the attraction of my blogging was the raw nature of how I was writing, but sometimes in the pursuit of raw, honest truth, I didn't use good judgment. And so as I age, I can better understand what's going on, what was driving me, and what would be a more appropriate way of expressing what I wanted to express.
The reason was, in 2005, Donald Trump was the biggest star on NBC News, not news.
Exactly. So for about a decade, Donald Trump was about the biggest star for NBC, and they were going to protect him at all costs. Then Donald Trump runs for president, and it becomes mandatory in the social class of the people who run major TV networks that you had to do everything you could to bring Donald Trump down.
On NBC, making $100 million in profit a year for the network. Had that tape leaked out in 2005, when it happened, heads would have rolled, including mine, because you just completely tarnished our major cash cow.
But can I just ask, I mean, I've been around, microphones and cameras my whole life, and my understanding to this day is you don't tape people without their knowledge.
In the state of California, this is what's amazing. So in 11 years later, NBC News themselves leaks that tape to the Washington Post. Of that, there is no doubt. They never launched an internal investigation. You have a proprietary piece of property that could affect a presidential election, and it gets out of your building to someone else. You don't launch an investigation as to how that got out. Like you've got to find out how that got out. Well, it would have ended in 5 seconds, and it got shoved off to the Washington Post.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is it's unfair to tape people when they don't know they're being taped.
It's also illegal. In the state of California, if both people don't know, it's litigious. That's why they gave it to the Washington Post. You got the biggest story of the October surprise of all surprises. You've got it in your hands, and you leak it to someone else? Why? You're a giant news division. This is so many clicks for you. This is so much traffic. Why wouldn't you own that? Well, you can't, because Donald is litigious, first of all. And second of all, there's enough reason to believe there's no camera on the bus that he didn't know he's being recorded.
But it's also wrong. You shouldn't do that. I mean, why is it different putting camera in somebody's bedroom or the bathroom? Like,
it's
what it is wrong.
So that's what I fought all week long before I got fired.
But let's get it's actually a more interesting story than I realized. So this happens 2005 now, almost 20 years ago. You tell your boss he's seen the tape. He has seen the bus portion of the tape when you talk to him?
He heard it that one day and told me. I never heard it. He just said, oh, yeah, the audio was on. He told me, I heard the Nancy stuff. He never mentioned anything about the word grab. Never came up.
Who was your boss?
Rob Silverstein.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
But here's the crazy thing.
Executive producer of the show.
Executive producer of Vax.
There's very little correlation between the things people say and what they actually do, right? There are commandments in the Bible for the Israelites to go into the promised land and just wipe out the original inhabitants, right? That doesn't tend to drive most people who read the Bible into committing genocide. So having a safe private space to share your nasty, degenerate, shocking, raunchy thoughts, right, is just part of being human. And then to be tape recorded without your permission, right, any one of us could look like an absolute fool in that sort of situation. And that the news media built this up to some major story about sexual assault was incredibly dishonest. Donald Trump was talking about what it was like to be a celebrity, encountering women who want to sleep with him, and how he can then fast forward to grabbing them by the pussy. He wasn't talking about going out and doing that to random women.
Is Hollywood, but we'll get to how he's become the executive producer of my new show once again, how that's come full circle.
What?
Forgiveness, Tucker. It's an amazingly powerful thing.
So I sometimes hear Orthodox Jews say really heinous things about Palestinians. I suspect there are a lot of Palestinians who sometimes say really heinous things about Jews. Right? When you're in a safe space with your in-group, right, particularly on Shabbat, if you're an Orthodox Jew, you're not usually worried about people taping you. It's nice to have a safe space to just dump what you're thinking and feeling.
You ought to try it. You ought to try it. He's working for me. Don't think I didn't kick his teeth in. Don't think we didn't fall out for 2 years. Don't think I didn't take back the Rolex I gave him as a gift when I moved from the Pee-wees to the big leagues. When I got my big job at the Today Show, I had a party and I said, "Here you go, baby. I'm giving you a Rolex. Thanks for helping me get there." 2 months later, I said, "You son of a bitch! If I ever see you, I'm gonna kill you, and I'm gonna give me that Rolex back."
And now he's your producer again.
Now he's my producer again because you know what? Sometimes you have. I don't blame him because he was looking to. He asked for permission when he sent the tape to NBC News. He was asking for permission to use it.
Wait, so okay, let's just back up here because I know the story, but others don't. So you and Rob Silverstein was your friend too, not just your EP. Oh. Yeah. So
spent the night together sharing a bed during the blackout in New York in like 2012 or whatever it was.
Wow.
Because we had.
All right, this Billy Bush interview with Tucker Carlson's a lot of fun. All right, Kip sent
It'd be a
along
real shame
this
if
video.
I don't know, there existed like, let's say, a video of, let's say, Senator Mitt Romney in a keynote conversation with Secretary of State Anthony Blinken where he says the quiet part out loud. That would be really unfortunate.
Yeah, a small parenthetical point, which is some wonder why there was such overwhelming support for us to shut down potentially TikTok or other entities of that nature. If you look at the postings on TikTok and the number of mentions of Palestinians relative to other social media sites, it's overwhelmingly so.
Oh no, that's like the quintessential example of the deep distrust young people have with the government. Who put that there? These are the people we're supposed to trust with our best interests for how the country's supposed to be run? Okay.
For me personally, I think in general, I really kind of don't trust the government. I don't.
I think I trust the government to like a certain extent.
No. Just straight up no.
No. Generally no.
I know a lot of instances where like the government has abused their power and really there's no repercussions because they are the system.
Because they don't care about the people. It's very obvious. It's all about media propaganda.
So in general, I notice that the higher someone's IQ, the more likely they are to be trusting in those segments of life where there is some reason to trust. Now, if they get burned, right, they will take revenge much more effectively than the low IQ person. But in general, I notice that higher IQ people are far more likely to work towards win-win solutions. And it's just so much more pleasant interacting with higher IQ people rather than lower IQ people. I notice in general, the smarter someone is, the more likely they are to be appropriately trusting and to give someone else a chance to be worthy of their trust.
I don't trust them fully. There are definitely aspects of the government that.
Right, so to automatically distrust government and institutions and other people, it's not a winning strategy, and to automatically believe everyone else in government is not a winning strategy, all right? You want to be appropriately trusting and appropriately skeptical, and to not expect a higher level of perfection from other people and institutions than one is able to demonstrate in one's own life.
That I for sure like do not trust. For instance, like I would say the police department.
Anything that like the government has implemented hasn't come from them doing it just out of the grace of their hearts. It's come from force. It's come from people.
So I've met people with IQs 140 and above who are just incredibly open and trusting. And these are not kids, right? These are people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, right? They've had a life experience where giving other people an appropriate chance and taking a chance on trusting someone who seems to be a good candidate for their trust has proved to be a winning strategy.
People literally forcing it to happen.
Like every single politician has ulterior motives to what they say because like their public image is.
Well, not just politicians, everybody, right? We're all a whole, complicated combination.
Really important to them and important to how they maintain their power. So I think that it's important to be skeptical, even if it's someone that you generally agree with on like a lot of social issues.
By the nature of people being in power, it's really hard for them to have my interest in me because the people in charge are very different to like someone like me. They have a huge amount of wealth. They have a huge amount of like influence in the world.
Now, I consistently notice the less intelligent the person, the more skeptical they are, the more distrusting they are, the more surly they are, and therefore the more difficult they are to deal with.
I think that American politics have always their main goal has always been to protect wealth.
Wealth is not seen as like a lifeline or seen as like a support. It's seen as it's like a lifeline in the sense that they use it to gain something rather than like use it to lose it.
I mean, obviously there are differences and goals between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, but I think at the end of the day, economics is always going to be the most important thing. And I don't see that changing anytime soon, especially with like our current two-party system.
You look like a lesbian.
This distrust young people feel in the government permeates many parts of society. It shapes how we see the world. However, the unfortunate truth is
So I don't understand why it's confusing or hypocritical to some people when I stress the importance of optimizing for truth, and also equally stress the importance of not telling the truth in certain circumstances or just staying quiet. All things being equal, optimize for truth. But all things really are equal. So let's say you're sworn in to testify before a jury and you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That doesn't mean you say to the clerk who's administering the oath, you're ugly. That doesn't mean that you say to the jury that you want to sleep with juror number 3. All right, it just refers to questions that you're asked by an attorney. And so if optimizing for truth is going to get you fired, if optimizing for truth is going to destroy your relationships with your family, your extended family, your friends, your community, your profession, your educational institution, then in those areas don't optimize for truth. Right? All things being equal, optimizing for truth is great. All things being equal, right? Not lying when you are speaking publicly about matters in the public square is a great ideal. But in private life, you definitely should not be stating truths without discrimination. Right? You should take into consideration other people's feelings and how much truth someone is able to handle. Right? Not everyone is well equipped to handle 100% truth. So sometimes optimizing for truth is the most important thing you can do, such as when you're writing or speaking publicly about matters in the public square, as long as it's not going to cost you your well-being and your family and your friends and your livelihood. But in private conversations, right, there should be all sorts of obvious truths that you don't point out because other people won't be able to handle it.
Gen Z is not the only group on social media. I know, I was scared too. Sometimes I go on Twitter. A shameless plug. So I've been running a little experiment. On Twitter, I don't follow anyone right now because I'm obnoxious.
Okay. I made notes on listen to this. Here we go.
And he demanded, forget Jeff Zucker and the NBC people. I want Immelt to do this with me. I want the CEO of GE to do my second-year deal. And Immelt told my brother, he's like, if there were cameras at that lunch or a little hidden microphone at that lunch, I guess I would have been fired because you just go with what Trump wants to go with.
Yeah.
And they were similar. Yeah, I mean, you know what I mean? Because here's one thing about Trump. His loyalty isn't long. If I were to say to him, hey, how dare you talk like that? Like, I'm not going to be on this bus. You shouldn't say such terrible things. I'm leaving. And I took a moral stand and walked out or whatever I did. Get rid of Billy Bush. We don't like him. We're doing Entertainment Tonight only now. That's it. And then you're done. So literally my job, hired to, was to make sure we had him as often as possible and get great sound bites and kick ass.
Did you ever hear any NBC executives complain about him or his politics?
No, but I do know that, look, he was placated as every big star of every big show in the business is, all the way up to the, ivory tower. 100%. From Jeff Zucker to Jeff Immelt. The whole, here's a beautiful irony. Jeff Zucker, who I like, was running the show at NBC Entertainment. He's the one who he built this. If Trump is Frankenstein,
So what makes Susie Wiles so effective is that she's the first Donald Trump chief of staff who's not trying to change Donald Trump, not trying to operate her own agenda over his agenda. So what makes a capable employee usually is someone who puts the employer's agenda over their own personal agenda. People who are unable to put their own ego and desires on hold for a few hours to put someone else or something else first are not going to be particularly effective in life. And with regard to Jimmy Carter, right, a lot of celebration in the news about the life of Jimmy Carter. He gave a favorite speech where he bemoaned how America was in a malaise. Well, it was clearly Jimmy Carter who was in the malaise. He just projected that malaise out into America. And I love this Billy Bush interview by Tucker Carlson. My one criticism of it is that they both fall into the dichotomy of, oh, these are good guys, these are bad guys. And if you are facing the incentives and were bringing the same baggage as the bad guys in the story, right, you would probably behave a lot like the bad guys. So I don't tend to sort people into good guys and bad guys. Rather, morality is usually domain specific.
built him in the laboratory. And they built this apprentice, and they made him the wheeling and dealing machine on his helicopter, this incredible image. Can you imagine a better image on network television crafted for you than that one? And Zucker then became, years later, the head of the resistance. The guy that built him then became the head of the resistance in CNN.
Amazing.
Right, because at one point he was incentivized to build Trump up as big as possible because that was good for him. And then in a different situation, when he was running CNN, he was incentivized to take Trump down because that would be good for his social standing. Right, here's the story how NBC tried to destroy Billy Bush.
She reminded me of this. Actually, last night we were saying you were coming, and I lost completely.
Yes, when Tucker says that when he got fired from Fox, his wife was happy. She didn't like Fox, and she didn't think that his show at Fox was good for him.
He lost control. I'm like completely lost control. Scared my daughter because I was just so. I mean, I have nothing to do with it, but I was just so mad.
Yeah,
that someone could do. Well, I felt it. Like, it's just so unfair. And then you don't call the man directly, and it's, through the lawyers, legal won't let me. It's like, what?
Yeah.
You just suspend all humanity and decency because you work for some stupid company? It's going to be gone in 10 years. There won't be an NBC. Like,
you have to suspend loyalty and decency in many jobs, right? You have to tell lies on behalf of your employer, right? Many jobs require that. All right, you get in an accident, you're not supposed to apologize to the other driver. Even if it's 100% your fault, your instructions from your insurance company are to not do that.
All of this is passing away. All of this is fake. And what matters is treating other people with decency. And they just forget that.
There's a history of that at the Today Show. If I were still the host of Access Hollywood and all of that had happened, and I never spent 2 months at the Today Show, I hadn't made that very recent move. I don't think they would have fired me at Access. I think I was the Matt Lauer of the place. It's a smaller place, but I'd been there so long. People looked up to me. I kind of had influence. They wouldn't have done it. They needed me. But remember, I'd gotten to the Today Show where half the place didn't want me there in the first place.
Right.
So it was definitely inside politics.
So it was
Mean Girls high school shit.
And now, I mean, it's so long ago and things have changed so much. that I kind of feel sorry for Matt Lauer, who at the time I was outraged.
And I laid into him, by the way. I got to speak to Matt Lauer 9 months afterwards, and I said,
Had he fallen yet?
He had not fallen yet. But he called me with some bullshit about, I can't believe that Trump is president and you lost your job, which is the number one thing I hear from everyone. But I was like, not from you, asshole. And I laid into it. And I laid, please don't try that on me. I'm not dumb. I mean, you're the leader. I said, you're the leader of that place. You could have fought for me, and you didn't. And I know why you didn't. Because you didn't want me and my full head of hair in that building. And I get it. I laid and said, no, I fought for you privately. I'm like, no, you didn't, dude. I know you didn't. And your minions didn't. And shut up and save it. And then when he got fired, I was like, hey, are you okay? Here's some books. Try these 3 books.
I did the same. I also texted him. I never liked him, but I always text people when they get fired, just because I feel like we should do that.
We should. You don't want to.
I texted Jeff Zucker when he got fired.
This is a beautiful habit to adopt, and it's one that I've adopted. When I hear that someone I know has been fired, I do reach out. Right, someone goes through some humiliation or suffering, I do try to text and to reach out. I think we should all do this.
You did?
Yes, and the funny thing is, and I really disliked Jeff Zucker intensely. I worked for him, and I intensely disliked
I like the way you say intensely.
I did, and he got fired, and I was in bed. I was in the morning, and someone said, Zucker just got fired, and I texted him immediately. Just 2-liner, because been there, and never heard back from him. This was 4 years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I was at a lunch in Abu Dhabi last week, and guess who sat next to me? Jeff Zucker.
Wait, he didn't choose to sit.
No, he just wound up.
His placard, his nameplate was next to you.
Yes, I sit down at lunch, and
in an official capacity. This is some type of event.
It was, I was just traveling, and
he didn't know he was sitting. next to
I wind up sitting at lunch. There's Jeff Zucker, and the first thing he says to me is,
"Thanks for your text."
Yes, it's the first thing he said. And
People remember these things.
They do remember them.
Always reach out. Someone's down, always reach out.
That is, can you say that again? Because that's the truest thing in life.
Whether like someone gets diagnosed with a disease or something, you're like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. Maybe I'll do nothing. But they get fired or something like that, always reach out. Always.
That is.
And I can tell you that from a guy. When I got canned, I had beautiful letters. Julie Bowen reached out. We
also went to high school with.
We went to high school with. You're like, God, did I have a crush on her?
Yeah.
Jeez. But Suzanne Summers and Cindy Crawford and crazy Dennis Quaid and it goes on. But there's many, lots and lots of.
It's funny you remember it all though.
Oh yeah, later. Kate Walsh, the actress, and you're. We know who you are. You're the greatest guy. I'm so sorry. It's like,
always reach out.
Always reach out.
So you texted Matt Lauer when talk about a fall too. I mean, Matt Lauer had one of the nicest, most impressive wives ever.
Yeah,
and an amazing person.
Yeah, very sweet.
Very smart. But what did he respond when you texted him?
Yeah. Yep.
Have you seen him?
And then afterwards, I chatted with him once, and I haven't talked to him in years. But
yeah.
I think one thing, there was this funny thing that happened in Rio. Like when we got back from Rio in the Olympics, all these people were writing these stories, like In Touch Weekly, gossip magazines were writing, Billy Bush wants Matt Lauer's job, and he's gunning for it. And this is just stuff that in no way is true, because I'm trying to build a 9 o'clock Regis-style show. We were going to do it at the top of the rock, the top of the building with like a jazz quartet, like a morning live audience. We had all these wonderful plans. It was going to be the most amazing show. So we were like, I don't want your job. But he read all these things, and he thought that I was planting them through my quote-unquote team, whoever would be on me. I'm just an...
Okay, it's January 6th. I think that the riot at the Capitol was a terrible thing. If someone assaulted a police officer, I would like to see them punished for that. I think assaulting police is a terrible thing. If someone did not assault anyone, did not damage any property, they just wandered through following the crowd, then much milder penalty. I do not want to see Donald Trump pardoning people who assaulted police. I do not want to see Donald Trump pardoning people who destroyed government property. On the other hand, I don't think that Americans are incentivized to pay that much attention to January 6th, because it doesn't really have anything to do with the quality of life for your average American. Just as the Israel versus Gaza versus Lebanon versus Syria war has nothing to do with the well-being and the quality of life of your average American, so too January 6th has nothing to do with the quality of your life. If you're interested in politics, then pay attention to January 6th. But if you're not interested in politics, there's no reason why Americans would put a higher priority on January 6th and its implications as opposed to pocketbook issues such as inflation, economic growth, or 20 other things that are going to have far more significance. So probably at my highest, I might have thought that January 6th was like 4 out of 10 in significance, meaning if 9/11 is like a 10 out of 10, then January 6th, maybe at the highest, I probably said 4 out of 10. I think my public pronouncements were more like 2, possibly 3 out of 10. Think the riot was terrible, but as far as significance, all right, I'd have to put it 1 out of 10. But I don't like the nihilism that celebrates this type of criminal violence, assaulting police, destroying government property. On the other hand, it was not a coup, right? It was not any of those fancy words for government takeover. There was never the slightest chance that these fools were going to take over the government or stop the confirmation that Joe Biden won the election. So I certainly don't side with the MAGA crowd that was enthused about January 6th, and I don't side with the news media who sees January 6th as this, particularly awful thing. Like, I like law and order. I hate assaulting the police. I hate willful destruction of property. But America faces so many challenges that I'm not going to say January 6th and its implications are among the top 10 problems that America faces. On the other hand, I absolutely understand why a normal person would look at January 6th and say, this is disqualifying. I would never want Donald Trump to be president. So I can understand why some people's commitment to process is sufficiently high that they would be justified in looking at January 6th and Donald Trump's encouragement and saying, okay, this is absolutely disqualifying. So there are very strong, accurate criticisms to be made of Donald Trump. But if you don't keep them right in alignment with reality, then that's not good either. So I wonder if Jesse Waters has anything interesting to say tonight.
This was the one who made it official.
President of the United States are as follows. Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 312 votes. Kamala D. Harris Kamala D. Harris of the state of California has received 226 votes.
She's the first woman to certify her own loss and the first person to certify a U.S. election for Hitler.
Well, today was obviously a very important day, and it was about what should be the norm and what the American people should be able to take for granted, which is that one of the most important pillars of our democracy is that there will be a peaceful transfer of power.
Trump calls today a big moment in history, and it's also the end of an era, the Obama era. A Democratic strategist says you can just smell it in the air, a deep sense of betrayal among Democrat voters, and an underlying realization that the Democratic Party's Politburo sold voters a bill of goods, the gaslighting of the public on Biden's decrepitude, the false idol of the Kamala Harris's campaign of joy, and the repeated cowering to the far left. Even Chuck Schumer says Democrats lost their mind.
We did some things wrong, and we have to look in the mirror and see what we did wrong. And then there's some things we didn't do that we should have done. One of the things we have to do is we must focus on the working families of America. We talked about the mechanics of the legislation and the details of the legislation, and we really didn't show the kind of empathy and concern to average, or show enough of it to average working families who didn't realize how much we had done and how much we care for them.
Chuck Schumer staged a photo op on Father's Day grilling burgers and dogs to show he's connected to average working families. Schumer got his one daughter a cushy job at Facebook and his other daughter's a lobbyist for Amazon. And neither of them ate the hamburger because Chuck put a slice of cheese on the raw meat. He's still saying Bidenomics delivered for working families, but those stupid rubes don't know how good they have it. We just need a new sales pitch. Here's some advice. Stop trying to show you care about Americans and just care about them. James Carville, still in recovery.
So maybe the daughters didn't eat the hamburger because they observed the Jewish law of not mixing meat with milk. What was the profound thing that I was about to share that would forever change your life? Damn.
Political strategy, you know, if you have an airplane crash, you got to go back and find out what went wrong. There's a simple, basic rule of politics is voters want an election about them. They don't want an election about you or your opponent. And for too much, we lost that. I lost it myself. We made it about Trump, and we didn't make it about voters. And that's it's never a good idea. And how could I, at 80 years old, been doing this for 50 years, lapse?
Okay, I remember. I wanted to play a little bit of this famous, crazy, nasty-ass honey badger video because very few of us are this resilient.
Really, and they twist around. Now look, here's a house full of bees. You think the honey badger cares? It doesn't give a shit. It goes right into the house of bees to get some larvae. How disgusting is that? It eats larvae. Ew, that's so nasty. But look, the honey badger doesn't care. It's getting stung like a...
All right. Virtually none of us can live life like the honey badger because we're not as invulnerable as the honey badger. But good metaphor for reality is the honey badger, right? The reality doesn't care. Reality doesn't care about your ideology, your story, your narratives, your grievance. So we never get to be like the honey badger, but reality gets to be like the honey badger every single day.
1,000 times. It doesn't give a shit. It's hungry. It doesn't care about being stung by bees. Nothing can stop the honey badger when it's hungry. Oh, what a crazy fuck. Look. Ew, it's eating larvae. That's disgusting. There it is, running in slow motion again. See? Now, what's interesting is that other animals, like these birds here, they just like to wait around until the honey badger's done eating, and then it swoops in to pick up the scraps. It says, you do all the work for us, honey badger, and we'll just eat whatever you find. How's that? What do you say, stupid? Look at this bird. Thanks for the treat, stupid. Hey, come back here, says the honey badger. Birds don't care, and you know what? The jackals do it too. Look at these little dogs. They're like, thanks, stupid. Thanks for the mouse. See you later. The honey badger does all the work while these other animals just pick up the scraps. At nighttime, the honey badger goes hunting because it's hungry. Look, here comes a fierce battle between a king cobra and a honey badger. I wonder what'll happen. Look at this. There's the honey badger just eating a mouse. And then look, get away from me, says the snake. Get away from me. Honey badger don't care. Honey badger smacks the shit out of it. And the snake comes back and it lashes right at the honey badger. Oh, little does the honey...
So I've felt like the honey badger at times in my life, and it's been a delusion. I've usually been like on the upside of my somewhat tendency to bipolar manic states.
Badger, no, FYI, it's been stung. It's been bitten by the snake, so while it's eating the snake, ew, that's disgusting. Meanwhile, the poisonous venom is seeping through the honey badger's body, and it passes out. Look at that sleepy fuck. Now the honey badger is just going to pass out for a few minutes, and then it's going to get right back up and start eating all over again because it's a hungry little bastard. Look at this. Like nothing happened. The honey badger gets right back up and continues eating the cobra. How disgusting. And of course, what does the honey badger have to eat for the next 3 weeks? Cobra, the honey badger.
Yes,